The first time my stepmother hit me, I was 20 years old. All I did was pick up my father's old watch, but she snatched it away, leaving a bruise on my wrist. She hissed that I had no right to touch anything in that house. 12 years later, in a packed courtroom, that same watch sat on the evidence table. My grandmother leaned into the microphone and calmly told the judge that the watch was actually hers. My name is Elena Ward, and walking into the Summit County Courthouse felt less like entering a hall of justice and more like stepping into a blast furnace. The air in the hallway was thick, suffocating, and smelled faintly of floor wax and nervous sweat. Camera shutters clicked in a rapid, aggressive staccato that sounded like gunfire, a rhythmic assault that bounced off the marble walls. Every flash blinded me for a fraction of a second, leaving purple spots dancing in my vision. The Ridgeview Gazette had already coined the headline. I had seen it on the newsstand just outside the security checkpoint. The Ward inheritance scandal. It was printed in bold, black letters that seemed to scream at anyone passing by. In a town like Ridgeview, Colorado. The name Ward did not just mean a family, it meant an institution. It meant the skyline. My father's company, Ward Ridge Properties, owned half the downtown storefronts and nearly every luxury cabin circling the perimeter of Cedar Ridge Lake. If you lived in this valley, you either rented from a Ward, worked for a Ward, or were currently trying to get a loan from a bank where a Ward sat on the board. And I was the traitor who had set fire to the castle. I kept my chin up, my eyes fixed on the double wooden doors at the end of the corridor. I could feel the heat of the stairs burning into my back. The gallery was packed. I did not need to turn around to know who was there. I could hear the low, buzzing whisper of Mrs. Gable, who had taught me Sunday school for 6 years. I could feel the burning curiosity of Mr. Henderson, whose hardware store had expanded 3 times thanks to exclusive contracts with my father's construction crews. They were not here for justice. They were here for the spectacle. They were here to watch the ungrateful daughter destroy the very people who had raised her. I slid into the plaintiff's chair, the wood hard and unforgiving against my spine. Beside me sat Lila Torres. Lila was an investigator with the Mountain States Integrity Bureau, a federal agency that most people in Ridgeview had never heard of until 3 months ago. She was sharp, efficient, and terrifyingly calm. She wore a charcoal suit that looked like armor. She was the only person in this entire room who looked at me and saw a human being, not a caricature of a greedy heiress. She did not touch me. Lila knew I hated being touched when I was cornered. She simply placed a heavy binder on the table between us, the sound of it hitting the wood acting like a gavel strike of its own. Then I looked across the aisle. My family sat at the defense table. They looked like a portrait commissioned for a magazine spread on American royalty. Veronica, my stepmother, was a vision of curated grief. She wore a beige dress that probably cost $2,000, but was understated enough to look humble to the jury. A single strand of pearls rested against her throat. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, her posture rigid, her face a mask of confused, hurt dignity. She looked like the victim. She always looked like the victim. Next to her was my father, Martin Ward. He looked thinner than I remembered. The structure of his face was sharper, his skin pulled tight over his cheekbones. But the air of authority was still there. It hung around him like cigar smoke. He did not look at me. He stared straight ahead at the empty judge's bench, his jaw set in a line of granite. He was a man who had built an empire from dirt and timber, and he looked furious that he had to pause his life to deal with something as trivial as his daughter's rebellion. And then there was Logan, my half-brother. He was leaning back in his chair, one arm draped over the backrest, looking bored. He wore a navy suit that fit too well. On his wrist, a gold chronograph glinted under the fluorescent lights. It was flashy, expensive, the kind of watch you buy to make sure people know you have money, not the kind you keep because it means something. He caught my eye and smirked, a tiny, almost imperceptible lifting of the corner of his mouth. It was a look that said he knew he was going to win because he always won, because he was the son, because he was the heir. Their lead defense attorney, Clifford Ames, was shuffling papers. He was a man who billed $800 an hour and made sure everyone knew it. He leaned over toward Veronica, but he pitched his voice just loud enough to carry across the 5 feet of empty space separating our tables. "This ungrateful girl is going to regret dragging private family business into a federal court," Ames murmured. My stomach twisted, a cold knot of nausea tightening below my ribs. Ungrateful. That was the word they always used. It was their favorite weapon. I looked down at my hands, clenched together on the table. My knuckles were white. The courtroom felt incredibly small suddenly, the walls closing in. To the rest of the room, to the jury that would soon be seated. The wards looked like the picture of success under siege. They saw a grieving widow, a hard-working patriarch, and a dutiful son. They did not see what I saw. They did not see the layers of rot beneath the polish. They did not know about the forged signatures on documents dated 3 days after my grandmother had a stroke. They did not know about the lawyer who had vanished into thin air right before he was supposed to testify. They did not know that this entire empire was currently being held together by lies and a shredder that had overheated from overuse. "All rise." The bailiff's voice boomed, shattering the whispers. The room went silent instantly. The shift in atmosphere was physical, like the air pressure dropping before a storm. The Honorable Judge Miriam Blake swept into the room. Judge Blake was a legend in this district. She was 60 years old, with silver hair cut into a sharp bob and eyes that could spot a liar from across a parking lot. She did not tolerate theatrics. She did not care about the ward name. She did not care about who owned the country club or who donated to the library fund. She sat down, adjusted her robe, and looked out over the courtroom with an expression of absolute neutrality. "Be seated," she said. Her voice was dry and crisp. The shuffling of bodies filled the room as everyone sat down. The wooden benches groaned. I felt Lila shift beside me, her presence a solid wall against the waves of hostility coming from the other side of the aisle. The court clerk stood up to read the docket. The words floated through the air, heavy and ugly. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud, testamentary fraud, obstruction of justice, elder abuse. Hearing them spoken aloud was jarring. These were criminal terms, felony terms. They sounded violent, and they were violent. It was a violence that did not leave bruises you could photograph, but it broke bones all the same. As the clerk spoke, my mind snapped back. It traveled back 12 years, away from this mahogany-paneled room, back to the hallway of my father's house. I was not a child when it happened. I was 20 years old. I was a college student. I was an adult woman. That was what people never understood. They assumed abuse happened to helpless children. But I remembered the shock of it. I remembered standing there, simply holding a watch, an old silver piece that had sat on my father's desk for as long as I could remember. I remembered the sudden, stinging impact, the way Veronica had lunged. It was not a slap of discipline. It was a strike of ownership. She had grabbed my wrist so hard that her nails had dug into my skin, leaving crescent-shaped marks that turned purple by the next morning. "You have no right to touch anything in this house," she had hissed. The memory was so vivid, I could almost feel the phantom pain on my forearm. I rubbed my wrist unconsciously. That was the moment I realized I was not a daughter to her. I was an intruder, and my father had stood there and watched. He had watched her strike his 20-year-old daughter, and he had done nothing. He had chosen his peace over my safety. He had chosen his perfect wife over his own blood. "Are you ready?" Lila whispered. Her voice pulled me back to the present. I blinked, focusing on the dust motes dancing in the shaft of light coming from the high windows. Was I ready? It was a question that carried more weight than just legal preparedness. This wasn't just about the money. If it were just about the money, I would have taken the settlement they offered me 6 months ago. I would have taken the check with the 6 zeros and disappeared. This was about the erasure. It was about how they had systematically edited me out of my own lineage. They had taken my name, my history, and my grandmother's legacy, and they had rewritten it to feature only themselves. They had tried to make me a ghost while I was still alive. I turned to Lila. I looked her in the eye. "Yes," I said. My voice was steady. I was surprised by how steady it was. Judge Blake adjusted her glasses. She looked at the prosecution table, then at the defense. "We will proceed with the opening exhibits," Judge Blake said. Lila stood up. She did not make a grand speech. She did not pace the floor. She simply nodded to the bailiff. "Your Honor, the government enters Exhibit A into evidence." The side door opened, and a federal marshal walked in. He was carrying a clear plastic evidence bag. The room seemed to hold its breath. The silence was absolute. You could hear the hum of the ventilation system. Inside the bag was a watch. It was not the gold, flashy thing Logan was wearing. It was old. It was silver, tarnished by time and neglect. The leather strap was worn dark, where the skin had rubbed against it for decades. It looked small in the marshal's large hands. It looked insignificant, just a piece of old metal and glass. But as the marshal walked it toward the evidence table, the overhead lights caught the silver casing. It flashed, a sharp, bright glint of light that cut across the room. I saw Veronica stiffen. It was a subtle movement, a locking of the spine. Her hand, which had been resting casually on the table, spasmed. Her fingers curled into a claw before she forced them to relax. Her perfect beige facade cracked for just a microsecond. Her eyes widened, fixing on that plastic bag with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. She knew. She knew that the cheap, battered thing in that bag was more dangerous than a loaded gun. She knew that this watch was the thread that, when pulled, would unravel the entire tapestry she had spent 30 years weaving. The marshal set it down on the table with a soft clack. That sound echoed in my ears like a gunshot. The trial of the Ward family had officially begun. To understand why I was sitting in a federal courtroom watching my family disintegrate, you have to go back 12 years. You have to go back to the day I realized that my father's house was no longer my home. I was 20 years old, a sophomore in college, back in Ridgeview for spring break. The house was a sprawling, modern thing of glass and cedar. Perched on a hill overlooking the town my great-grandfather had helped build. It was beautiful, it was impressive, and it was cold. It felt less like a place where people lived and more like a showroom for an expensive lifestyle brand. This was the Veronica era. My mother had died when I was 14. Cancer had taken her piece by painful piece, and when she finally let go, she took the warmth of the house with her. My father, Martin Ward, did what men of his generation often did with grief. He buried it under blueprints and concrete. He worked 18 hours a day. He expanded the company. He built shopping centers and luxury condos, trying to fill the silence in his chest with noise and commerce. He left me to navigate my teenage years alone, a ghost haunting the hallways of a house that was too big for two people who did not know how to talk to each other. Then came Veronica. She appeared 2 years after the funeral. She was the director of a local charity board, a woman who wore beige cashmere and spoke in a voice that sounded like poured honey. She was organized. She was efficient. She swept into my father's life and tidied up his grief. She organized his schedule. She redecorated the living room, and she told him exactly what he needed to hear, that he had mourned long enough, that he deserved to be happy, and that she was the only one who understood the burden of being a Ward. By the time I was 20, she had completely sanitized our lives. The photos of my mother were gone, replaced by tasteful abstract art. The furniture was new, stiff, and white. Veronica ran the household like a military operation disguised as a domestic paradise, and I was the disorderly element she could not quite scrub away. That week, the tension in the house was a physical thing, thick and suffocating. Veronica had spent the last 3 days making subtle digs at me. She did it masterfully, always when my father was within earshot but distracted. She would sigh loudly when I entered a room. She would apologize to my father for my moodiness when I had not said a word. She crafted a narrative where I was the damaged, dramatic, ungrateful daughter who refused to accept her kindness. She called it being difficult. I called it grieving. My father, desperate for peace, believed her. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. The sky outside was a bruised purple, threatening a late spring snowstorm. I had gone into my father's home office to look for a book I had left behind on my last visit. The office was the only room Veronica had not fully conquered yet. It still smelled of my father, old paper, cedar shavings, and the faint, sharp scent of whiskey. I saw it sitting on the corner of his mahogany desk, the watch. It was a silver pocket watch that had been converted into a wristwatch with a thick leather strap. It was heavy, scarred with scratches, and utterly without pretension. It was the watch my father used to let me hold when I was a little girl sitting on his lap during thunderstorms. He would hold it up to my ear and tell me that as long as I could hear the ticking, time was moving forward, and the storm would eventually pass. It was one of the few tangible connections I had left to the version of him that existed before he became the great Martin Ward, tycoon and widower. Without thinking, I reached out. My fingers brushed the cool metal. I picked it up. The weight of it was familiar and grounding. I ran my thumb over the cracked crystal face. For a second, I was not 20 years old and angry. I was 7, and safe. "What do you think you are doing?" The voice cut through the air like a whip. I spun around. Veronica was standing in the doorway. She was wearing a cream-colored silk blouse and tailored slacks. Her hair was perfect. Her face was not. Her eyes were wide, dark, and filled with a sudden, terrifying rage that seemed completely out of proportion to the moment. She crossed the room in 3 long strides. I barely had time to react before she reached out and grabbed my wrist. She did not just take the watch. She dug her nails into the soft skin on the underside of my forearm and wrenched my arm down. The pain was sharp and immediate. I gasped, my fingers creating a reflex, but she squeezed harder, forcing my hand open. The watch tumbled onto the thick carpet with a dull thud. "Let go of me!" I shouted, trying to pull back. She did not let go. Instead, she used her grip on my wrist to pull me forward, off balance, and then she swung her other hand. The slap was loud. It cracked through the quiet room, a sharp, stinging explosion against my left cheek. My head snapped to the side. For a second, there was absolute silence. I stood there, stunned. My cheek burned like it had been held against a hot iron. My wrist throbbed where her nails had broken the skin. I stared at her, unable to process what had just happened. My stepmother had just hit me. Not a spanking, not a discipline tap. She had struck a 20-year-old woman across the face with full force. "You have no right," she hissed. Her voice was low, vibrating with venom. "You have no right to touch anything in this house. You have no right to snoop. You have no right to put your hands on things that do not belong to you." "It is my father's watch," I stammered, my hand coming up to cup my stinging cheek. She stepped into my personal space, forcing me to back up until my legs hit the edge of the desk. She looked down at me, her expression twisting into something ugly and triumphant. "Nothing here is yours. Elena, do you understand? This watch, this house, this name, it is not for you. You are a guest here, and a very unwelcome one at that." The door behind her opened. "What is going on in here?" My father stood in the doorway. He looked tired. He was holding a tumbler of scotch. His tie loosened. He looked from Veronica to me, and for a brief, foolish moment, I thought he would see. I thought he would see the red mark blooming on my face. I thought he would see the blood welling where Veronica's nails had pierced my wrist. I thought he would see the fear in his daughter's eyes. Veronica spun around. The transformation was instantaneous. The rage vanished, replaced by a flustered, shaky distress. She put a hand to her chest, breathing hard. "Martin, thank God," she said, her voice trembling perfectly. "I walked in and she was going through your desk. She was digging through your private drawers. I tried to stop her, to tell her to wait until you came home, and she lunged at me." "She what?" Martin asked. His voice dropped an octave. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "That is a lie!" I screamed. The injustice of it felt like it was choking me. I was looking for a book. I picked up the watch. "She hit me. Dad, look at my face. She hit me." Martin walked into the room, He did not look at my face. He did not look at my wrist. He looked at the open drawer of his desk, which I had not touched, but which Veronica must have opened before I even turned around. He looked at the watch lying on the floor. He picked up the watch. He rubbed the glass with his thumb, checking for damage. Then he looked at me. "Elena," he said. His voice was cold. It was the voice he used to fire incompetent contractors. "Why can you not respect boundaries?" I gaped at him. "Boundaries? She just assaulted me." "Stop being so dramatic," he snapped. "Veronica is trying to keep this house in order. She is trying to protect my things. And you are always looking for a fight. You are always trying to make her the villain." I held out my arm. "Look at my wrist. Dad, look at the blood." He glanced at it, then looked away, his expression tightening with annoyance. "You probably did that when you were wrestling with her," he said dismissively. "God, Elena, you are 20 years old. Stop acting like a spoiled child. Go to your room. I do not want to see you for the rest of the night." I looked at him. I really looked at him. I saw a man who was so desperate to believe in the fantasy of his perfect second marriage that he was willing to sacrifice the reality of his first child. He was not confused. He was choosing the lie because it was easier than the truth. Veronica stood behind him. She did not smile. She did not smirk. She just watched me with cold, dead eyes, her hand resting possessively on my father's shoulder. She had won. She had proven that she could hurt me, physically and emotionally, and he would thank her for it. I did not say another word. There was nothing left to say. The father I loved had died with my mother. This man was just a landlord who shared my last name. I walked past them, holding my injured wrist against my chest. I went to my room, but I did not stay. I pulled my suitcase out of the closet. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work the zipper. I threw my clothes in haphazardly. I wanted out. I needed to be anywhere but here. As I packed, the heating vent in the corner of the room carried sound up from the kitchen below. It was a quirk of the old house's architecture that Veronica had not managed to renovate away yet. If you stood in the right spot, you could hear conversations from the breakfast nook. I heard the clinking of ice against glass. Then I heard Veronica's voice. She was not speaking to my father. She was on the phone. "It was a mess," she was saying. Her voice was low, efficient, businesslike. "The girl is unstable. Martin sees it now. Yes, we need to move forward with the trust updates. Immediately. We need to move everything into a safer structure before she gets it into her head that she has a claim." I froze. A safer structure. A claim. I did not understand the legal terminology then. I did not know what a grantor trust was, or what a durable power of attorney meant, but I understood the tone. It was the tone of a predator securing a kill. She was not just trying to kick me out of the house. She was trying to erase me from the future. I finished packing in silence. I carried my bag down the back stairs, avoiding the main hallway. The house was quiet now. My father had likely retreated to his study to drink until the unpleasantness faded. Veronica was likely planning her next charity gala. I walked out the back door into the cold night air. The wind bit at my face, stinging the skin where she had slapped me. I loaded my bag into the trunk of my beat-up sedan. Before I got in the driver's seat, I looked back at the house. The lights were on in the study. Through the large bay window, I could see Veronica. She was standing by the desk, looking out into the dark, though I knew she could not see me in the shadows. She raised her hand to adjust the curtain. The light from the chandelier caught something on her wrist. It was the watch. She had put it on. It was huge on her slender arm, sliding down near her hand. She was wearing it, not because she liked it. It was old, scratched, and masculine. Everything she hated. She was wearing it because it was a trophy. She was wearing it to mark her territory. I stood there in the driveway, shivering not from the cold, but from a sudden, profound realization. She intended to take everything, not just the money my father was making, but the history that came before her. She wanted to scrub the timeline clean until the name Ward began with her and ended with her son. I got into my car and locked the door. I drove away from Ridgeview without looking back, telling myself I was just leaving a toxic situation, I told myself I did not care about the money or the house. I told myself she could have the damn watch. I was wrong. I did care. And as I drove onto the highway, leaving the valley behind in my rearview mirror, I felt a strange sensation. It was not just sadness, it was the feeling of being hollowed out. I was a ward, but I was driving away with nothing but a suitcase of dirty laundry and a bruise on my arm, while the woman who hated me sat in my father's chair, wearing my grandfather's time on her wrist, counting down the minutes until I was gone for good. That was the night Elena Ward died, and the person who would eventually drag them all to court was born. I just did not know it yet. It was 7 years later when I finally came back to Ridgeview, and the air still tasted exactly the same. It tasted like pine needles, cold lake water, and money. I was 27 years old now. I was a senior data analyst at Northline Metrics, a mid-sized tech firm in Denver. I paid my own rent. I paid my own car insurance. I had built a life that had absolutely nothing to do with the Ward family empire, and I was proud of that. But standing in the main hall of the Cedar Ridge Lodge, wearing a stiff black dress and holding a glass of lukewarm water, I felt that familiar, suffocating weight settle back onto my shoulders. My father was dead. It had been a massive heart attack. Sudden, they said. He had collapsed on the job site of the new luxury condos downtown. He died doing what he loved, which was expanding his footprint on the earth. The entire town had turned out to mourn him, to Ridgeview. Martin Ward was a self-made hero, the local boy who built a kingdom. To me, he was a stranger I had been grieving for 7 years, ever since he watched his wife strike me and told me to stop being dramatic. The wake was being held at the lodge, one of the crown jewels of the Ward portfolio. It was a massive structure of timber and stone overlooking the lake, designed to look rustic but costing more than most neighborhoods. The room was packed. I accepted hug after clumsy hug from people I barely recognized. They murmured condolences into my ear, their breath smelling of coffee and expensive wine. "So, you are doing computers now?" Mrs. Gable asked, patting my arm with a pitying look. "Data analysis," I corrected gently. "How nice," she said, in a tone that suggested I was working a cash register at a convenience store. "It is good you have something to keep you busy, dear." I looked across the room. Veronica was holding court near the massive stone fireplace. She looked devastatingly beautiful in black silk, playing the role of the grieving widow with Oscar-worthy commitment. She was dabbing at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, leaning heavily on my half-brother, Logan. Logan looked solemn, but every few minutes, I caught him checking his phone or adjusting his cuffs. He looked less like a son mourning his father and more like a CEO waiting for the board meeting to start. I felt a hand on my elbow. I turned to see Veronica. She had detached herself from her admirers and glided over to me. She pulled me into a hug. It looked warm to the cameras and the guests, but her body was rigid against mine. She smelled of Chanel and steel. "I am so glad you came, Elena," she whispered, her voice loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. Then, she leaned in closer, her lips brushing my ear. Her voice dropped to a frequency only dogs and unwanted stepdaughters could hear. "Do not make today about you." She pulled back, giving me a sad, watery smile, and smoothed the hair back from my forehead like I was a child. "Martin would be so happy you are here," she said loudly. I felt a flash of nausea. I nodded stiffly and moved away, needing to escape her orbit. I retreated to the corner of the room, near the heavy velvet drapes. That was when I saw her. My grandmother, Ruth Ellison. She was sitting in a high-backed armchair, almost swallowed by the upholstery. She looked tiny. Her skin was like crinkled parchment, and her hands, resting on her knees, were trembling with a constant, rhythmic tremor. The rumors in town were that Ruth was losing it. People said she was sliding into dementia, that her mind was a sieve. No one was talking to her. They treated her like a piece of furniture, something that had been in the family a long time but was no longer useful. But as I watched her, she looked up. Her eyes locked onto mine. They were not cloudy. They were not vacant. They were sharp, blue, and terrifyingly alert. She looked at me, then her eyes darted to Veronica, and then back to me. It was a look of warning. The reading of the will happened 2 days later. It was held at the law offices of a local firm, not the prestigious Denver firm my father used for corporate business, but a smaller practice in town. I sat in a leather chair that was slightly too low, forcing me to look up at everyone else. Veronica and Logan sat together on a plush love seat. Veronica held Logan's hand, her other hand clutching a tissue. I did not expect much. I knew how Veronica operated. I expected that she would get the bulk of the estate. I expected Logan to get the company, but I thought, foolishly, that my father would have left me something. Acknowledgement, a few shares of stock, maybe the cabin my mother loved, maybe the silver watch he had promised me when I was a child. The lawyer, a man I did not recognize named Mr. Henderson, cleared his throat. He began to read. The legal jargon washed over me, but the meaning was brutal and clear. To my wife, Veronica Ward, I leave the primary residence at Ridgeview Heights, the Cedar Ridge Lodge, and 70% of the controlling interest in Ward Ridge Properties LLC, along with all associated investment accounts and liquid assets. I stayed silent. To my son, Logan Ward, I leave the remaining 30% of Ward Ridge Properties LLC and the directive to assume the role of Vice President of Operations immediately. I waited. My heart was hammering against my ribs. And to my daughter, Elena Ward. The lawyer paused. He adjusted his glasses. I leave the sum of $10,000. The silence in the room was absolute. $10,000. My father was worth millions. $10,000 was not an inheritance. It was a tip. It was a dismissal. It was a calculated insult designed to say, I remember you, and you are worth nothing to me. There was no mention of personal effects, no mention of the silver watch, no mention of my mother's jewelry. Nothing. Veronica let out a small, strangled sob. Oh, poor Martin. She wept, looking at the lawyer. He struggled so much with this decision. He was so worried about Elena. I stood up. My legs felt numb. Worried about me? I asked. My voice was shaking, not with grief, but with a cold, hard rage. Veronica looked at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. He knew you have been struggling. Elena, he did not want to burden you with assets you could not manage. He wanted you to have a safety net, but he felt that giving you control over the business or the properties would only stress you out. Given your history of instability. Instability? I repeated. I have been a data analyst for 5 years. I own my own condo. I have a 401k. What instability are you talking about? Mr. Henderson, the lawyer, held up a hand. Ms. Ward, please. This is the last will and testament of your father. It is a legally binding document. When was this signed? I asked. Mr. Henderson looked at the paper. It was dated 6 months ago. 6 months ago? I stared at him. My father had open-heart surgery 2 years ago. He has been in decline. Who was in the room when he signed this? It was a private family discussion, Veronica said smoothly. Martin wanted to settle his affairs. We talked about it at length. We all agreed this was for the best, to protect the legacy. We all agreed? I looked at her. I was not there. You are rarely here. Elena, Logan said. He spoke for the first time. His voice bored and arrogant. That is the point, is it not? You left, you abandoned the family, and now you show up with your hand out expecting a payout? I felt the blood rushing to my face. This was a setup. It was a complete and total lockout. I want to see the previous wills. I said, I know he had a will before this one. I know he did. Mr. Henderson sighed. Previous drafts are irrelevant. Ms. Ward, this is the most current, valid document. It supersedes all others. I looked at my grandmother. Ruth was sitting in the corner in her wheelchair. She had her handbag clutched in her lap with both hands. Her knuckles were white. She was looking down at her purse, her lips moving silently. She looked frail, defeated. I turned back to Veronica. You made him do this. You isolated him, and you made him write me out." Veronica's face hardened. The mask of grief slipped just a fraction, revealing the steel underneath. "Your father made his choices. Elena, if you had been a better daughter, maybe his choices would have been different. But you have always been difficult. You have always been jealous. Honestly, you should be grateful he left you anything at all. Most fathers would have cut off a child who caused as much pain as you did." She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "I think we are done here, Mr. Henderson." It was a dismissal. I had been dismissed from my own father's death. I walked out of the office feeling like I was moving underwater. The betrayal was physical. It was not just about the money. It was the fact that my father had allowed this. He had let her win. He had let her convince him that I was nothing. I stood in the hallway, trying to get my breathing under control. The door to the office opened, and Logan walked out. He stopped when he saw me. He smirked, checking his reflection in the glass of a framed painting on the wall. "You know," he said, not looking at me, "you really should take the 10,000. Buy yourself a new car, or therapy. God knows you need it. You should be grateful you were not erased completely." He laughed, a short, sharp sound, and walked toward the elevators. The door opened again. Veronica came out, guiding Ruth's wheelchair. Ruth looked small and fragile. Veronica was cooing at her, playing the dutiful daughter-in-law. "Come on, Mother Ruth," Veronica said. "Let us get you back to the center. It has been a long day for you." I stepped forward. I wanted to say goodbye to my grandmother. I wanted to hug the only person in this family who had ever actually loved me. "Grandma," I said softly. Veronica stiffened. "We are in a hurry. Elena, she is tired. She gets confused when there is too much stimulation." Ruth looked up. Her eyes met mine. For a second, the tremor in her hands seemed to stop. She reached out toward me. "Elena," she croaked. Her voice sounded rusty, unused. I stepped closer, ignoring Veronica's glare. I took my grandmother's hand. It was cold and dry, like autumn leaves. "Goodbye, Grandma," I said, fighting back tears. "I am going back to Denver." Ruth's grip suddenly tightened. It was shocking how strong she was. She pulled my hand toward her. I felt something sharp scratch my palm. She was pressing something into my hand, a small, folded square of paper. She looked me dead in the eye. Her expression was intense, urgent. "Take it," she whispered. Veronica swooped in. "Okay, that is enough," she said sharply. She grabbed the handles of the wheelchair. "Goodbye, Elena. Drive safe." She wheeled Ruth away aggressively, pushing her toward the exit. Ruth did not look back. She slumped into her chair, returning to the role of the senile old woman. I stood there for a moment, my heart racing. I closed my fingers over the piece of paper. I waited until they were on the elevator. Then I ran to the stairwell. I practically sprinted down the 3 flights of stairs to the parking garage. I got into my rental car and locked the doors. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys. I took a deep breath. I looked around the garage to make sure no one was watching. It was empty. I opened my hand. The paper was a receipt from a grocery store, old and faded, but on the back, written in shaky, spiderweb handwriting, was a message in blue ballpoint pen. I read it. Then I read it again. "He promised you the watch, the lake, and everything that goes with it." I stared at the words, the watch, the lake. My grandmother knew. She was not senile. She was watching, and she knew that what had just happened in that office was a lie. I looked up at the concrete ceiling of the parking garage. A strange sensation washed over me. It was not sadness anymore. It was clarity. They thought they had buried me today. They thought they had paid me off with $10,000 and a lecture on gratitude. But they had made a mistake. They had forgotten that I was a data analyst. My entire job was finding patterns in chaotic information. My entire job was finding the truth buried in the numbers. And my grandmother had just given me the first data point. I put the car in reverse. I was not going back to Denver. Not yet. I had a watch to find. I drove to the outskirts of Ridgeview, where the manicured lawns of the Ward estate gave way to strip malls and sensible, brick-faced apartment complexes. This was where they kept my grandmother. The Sunny Meadows retirement community was not a bad place. It was clean. It smelled of lemon polish and cafeteria coffee. But it was not the luxury facility with the lake views and the private chefs that a family with the Ward fortune should have paid for. That was the first thing that struck me when I walked into the lobby. My father had built luxury condos for retirees who played golf 3 times a week. His own mother was living in a facility funded entirely by her own teacher's pension and Social Security checks. I signed in at the front desk. The receptionist, a kind woman with tired eyes, smiled at me. "She is in room 312. She said. "She has been having a good day, very alert." I walked down the hallway, the linoleum squeaking under my boots. I felt a strange mixture of guilt and anticipation. I had not visited enough. I had stayed away because it hurt too much to see her fading, or so I told myself. The truth was, I stayed away because I was a coward. I stayed away because looking at her reminded me of everything I had lost. I knocked softly on the door of room 312. "Come in," a voice said. It was not the shaky, confused voice I had heard at the lawyer's office. It was clear. It was firm. I pushed the door open. The room was small, cramped with the detritus of a long life condensed into 300 square feet. There were stacks of photo albums, boxes of old letters, and a heavy quilt draped over the single bed. Ruth Ellison was sitting in her armchair by the window, looking out at the parking lot. She was not trembling. Her hands were steady as she held a cup of tea. She turned to look at me. The transformation was startling. The fog that seemed to hang over her when Veronica was around had evaporated. Her blue eyes were sharp, assessing, and remarkably clear. "Close the door, Elena," she said, "and lock it." I did as I was told. The click of the lock felt loud in the small room. I walked over and sat on the edge of the bed, facing her. "Grandma?" I asked hesitantly. She set her tea down on the small side table. She looked at me for a long moment, studying my face as if she were looking for cracks in a porcelain vase. "You look like him," she said softly. "You have Nathan's chin." My Nathan. Not Martin. Martin always had a weak chin. He had to grow that beard to hide it. She let out a small, dry chuckle. It was a sound I had not heard in a decade. I pulled the crumpled receipt from my pocket. The note she had written was still there, the ink stark against the white paper. "He promised you the watch, the lake, and everything that goes with it." I smoothed the paper out on my knee. "You wrote this," I said. She nodded. I did. I had to wait until the witch was distracted. She watches me like a hawk. That one. She counts my pills. She checks my phone logs. She thinks I'm losing my mind. "Are you?" I asked. She leaned forward, her gaze intense. "I am 82 years old. Elena. My knees hurt when it rains, and I forget where I put my reading glasses. But I know exactly who I am, and I know exactly what they did." She gestured to the photo albums stacked on the floor. "Hand me the blue one, the one with the cracked spine." I picked up the heavy album and handed it to her. She opened it with reverence. The pages smelled of dust and adhesive. She flipped through the black and white photos until she found what she was looking for. She tapped a picture of a man standing next to a classic car, holding a baby. "That is my father," she said, "your great-grandfather. And that watch, the one Veronica snatched off your wrist, that was his." I leaned in closer. In the photo, I could see the chain of a pocket watch looping from his vest. "It was never Martin's," she said, her voice hard. "Martin never cared for old things. He liked new. He liked shiny. He liked things he could put a price tag on. When my father died, I gave that watch to Martin for safekeeping. I told him, specifically, that it was for you. I told him to give it to you when you turned 21. It was supposed to be a connection to the Ellison line." She looked up at me, her eyes burning. "It represents the family that actually paid for everything." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Dad built the company. He built Ward Ridge Properties from the ground up." Ruth snorted. It was a derisive, unladylike sound. "Martin built the buildings," she corrected. "Nathan Ellison paid for the land. My husband, your grandfather, When Martin started out, he was broke. He had big ideas and empty pockets. Nathan gave him the seed money. He gave him the inheritance that had been in my family for 3 generations. We leveraged our land, our savings, everything, to back Martin's first 3 developments. She turned another page. There was a newspaper clipping of a young Martin Ward cutting a ribbon. The deal was simple. She said, it was a family business. The Ellison capital fueled the Ward construction. But when your mother died, when Veronica sank her claws in, the history started to change. Suddenly, it was all Martin Ward, the self-made genius. The Ellison name disappeared from the brochures, and then it started disappearing from the legal documents. I felt a chill run down my spine. So the money, the foundation of the company, it came from you? It came from us, she said firmly, and it was meant for you. Martin knew that. For years, he honored it. She closed the album and rested her hand on the cover. 5 years ago, before his heart started giving out, Martin showed me a draft of his will. We sat in his study, drinking brandy. He was worried about you. He missed you. He told me he was leaving the lodge and the controlling interest in the company to you. He said it was the only way to make right the fact that he had let Veronica push you away. I felt a lump form in my throat. He was going to leave it to me? He did leave it to you, Ruth said, or at least, he tried to. She leaned back, her face shadowing with the memory. Veronica found out. I do not know how. Maybe she snooped. Maybe she has passwords to his email. But the atmosphere in that house changed overnight. Suddenly, it was all about restructuring. That was her favorite word. She kept telling Martin that they needed to protect the assets. She said you were young, inexperienced, emotional. She told him that if you got control, you would sell it off or run it into the ground. Ruth paused, taking a breath. One night, I stayed late at the house. I was supposed to be sleeping in the guest room, but I was thirsty. I went down to the kitchen. The door to the study was open just a crack. She lowered her voice, pulling me into the conspiracy of that night. I saw 2 piles of paper on his desk, 2 wills. I could see the headers. Martin was sitting there, head in his hands. Veronica was pacing. She was not shouting. She never shouts when she is winning. She was hissing, like a snake. What did she say? I asked. She said, "You owe my son." She said, "Logan has given up his 20s for this company." She said, "Elena has been gone for years. She does not care about you. She only cares about the check." Ruth's hands clenched into fists on her lap. Then she said something I will never forget. She slammed her hand on the desk and said, "Logan is not your only child, Martin, but he is the only one who is actually here." I felt a wave of nausea. It was the same manipulation she had used on me, the same wedge she had driven between us for a decade. The next day, Ruth continued, Logan started acting differently. He walked into the office like he owned the floorboards. He started referring to the business as our empire, and Veronica. She started spending a lot of time with Harold Pike. Harold Pike, I repeated. The lawyer? Ruth nodded. He was a weak man, a gambler. Martin used him for small things, real estate closings, zoning permits. He was never the corporate counsel. But suddenly, he was at the house 3 nights a week. I went to see Harold. She said, about a month before Martin died, I walked into his office and I asked him point blank about the will. I asked him why Martin was rewriting it when he was so sick. What did he say? He would not look at me. He was sweating. He kept shuffling papers and talking about client privilege. He looked terrified. Elena, 2 weeks later, his office was empty. The sign was gone. The phone was disconnected. People said he retired to Florida or Mexico, but men like Harold Pike do not just retire in the middle of the week without a party. She reached under the cushion of her chair and pulled out a small, rectangular object. It was another photo, but this one was different. It was a Polaroid, old and slightly faded. Look at this, she said, handing it to me. I took the photo. It was a picture of my father's study, taken years ago. I recognized the heavy drapes, the mahogany desk, and there, in the background, was the wall behind the desk. There was a large oil painting of a hunting scene hanging there. "Look closely at the painting," Ruth instructed. I squinted. The painting was hanging slightly crooked, and behind the bottom right corner, there was a faint line in the wood paneling, a seam. "There is a safe," Ruth whispered. "A wall safe. Martin had it installed 20 years ago. He used to keep cash in there for contractors who preferred to be paid off the books. He kept the deeds to the original Ellison land parcels, and he kept his personal journals." "Does Veronica know about it?" I asked. Ruth hesitated. She knows there is a safe, but she does not know the combination. Martin was paranoid about security. He never wrote it down. He told me once that the combination was something that only mattered to him. Not a birthday, not an anniversary. She looked at me meaningfully. "I think the original will is in there. Elena, the real one. The one he signed before she broke him. And I think the proof of what she did to Harold Pike might be in there too." "But why the watch?" I asked, my mind racing. "Why did you say the watch is the key?" Ruth smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Because, my dear, Martin had a sense of humor, or perhaps a sense of irony. When he installed that safe, he needed a way to hide the keypad. It is not digital, it is mechanical. You need a tool to engage the tumblers before you can even enter the code." She tapped the photo of the watch in the album. "The winding key," she said. "The winding key for my father's pocket watch. It has a specific shape, a square bit with a triangular notch. It fits the mechanism behind that painting. Without that watch, you cannot even expose the lock." I stared at her. The realization hit me like a physical blow. "That is why she wanted it," I whispered. Ruth nodded. "That day, when she hit you, it was not because she was worried about you touching Martin's things. It was because she was terrified. She saw you holding the one thing that could unlock her secrets. She did not know if you knew. She panicked. She had to get it away from you. And then, she had to get you out of the house before you figured it out." Ruth reached out and grabbed my hand. Her grip was fierce. "She wears it. Elena, I have seen it. She wears it on days she feels insecure. She wears it like a talisman. She thinks it is a trophy of her victory over you, but she does not know what it actually does. She does not know it is a key." I looked at my grandmother. I saw the years of silence, the years of playing the fool, the years of enduring Veronica's condescension just to survive long enough to tell me this. "Why didn't you tell the police?" I asked. "Or a lawyer?" "Who would believe a senile old woman against the grieving widow Ward?" she asked bitterly. "Veronica threatened to put me in a state facility. Elena, a place where they strap you down and feed you mush. I had to be quiet. I had to wait for you to come back. I had to wait until you were strong enough to fight her." She squeezed my hand. "Are you strong enough, Elena?" I thought about the $10,000. I thought about the slap. I thought about my father, dying in that house surrounded by lies. I thought about the way Logan had looked at me in the parking lot. "I am," I said. Ruth sat back, looking satisfied. "Good, because we are going to need more than just a story. We need that watch, and we need to get into that study." She leaned in again, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The code," she said. "I do not know the numbers, but I know how Martin thought. He said it was the day his life actually started." "My birthday?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, he loved you. But Martin's life was his work. Think about the business. Think about the Ellison money." I nodded slowly, my mind already working through the dates, the project numbers, the history of the company. I was a data analyst. Finding the right number was what I was born to do. Ruth looked at the door, listening for footsteps in the hallway. "You have to go," she said. "Veronica comes on Tuesdays at 4 to pretend to care about me. You cannot be here." I stood up. I leaned down and kissed her forehead. Her skin was paper thin. "I will get it back. Grandma, I promised. I will get it all back." She looked up at me, and for a moment, she looked just like the formidable matriarch she used to be. "The watch is the key. Elena," she repeated, "and they know. That is why she hit you. That is why they tried to erase you. Because as long as you exist, and as long as that watch exists, they never truly own any of it. I walked out of the nursing home into the bright, harsh sunlight of the parking lot. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. I was not just a rejected daughter anymore. I was not just a victim of a greedy stepmother. I was a woman with a map. I started the engine. I drove back toward the town, toward the looming silhouette of the mountains. The Cedar Ridge Lodge sat up there, perched on the edge of the water, and inside the main house, somewhere in a drawer or on a wrist, was the key to my inheritance. I was going to take it back, and when I did, I was going to use it to tear their perfect, stolen life down to the studs. I sat in the living room of my rental condo, the glow of my laptop screen the only light in the room. It was 2 a.m. My eyes burned, but I could not sleep. I had scanned the Polaroid photo Ruth had given me at 600 dots per inch, the highest resolution my portable scanner could handle. On the screen, the photo of my father's study was grainy but legible. I cropped the image, isolating the silver watch sitting on the corner of the desk. I applied a sharpening filter, then another. I adjusted the contrast, pulling the shadows out of the metal. There it was. It was faint, just a scratch in the silver to the naked eye. But under the digital magnification, the engraving on the inside of the clasp was undeniable. R.E. SDB number 1437. R.E. Ruth Ellison. SDB. Safe deposit box. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was a location. It was a dead drop. It was a breadcrumb trail left by a woman everyone had written off as senile. I was at the Sunny Meadows nursing home by 8 o'clock the next morning. Ruth was awake, sitting up in bed, eating toast with shaking hands. When I showed her the enhanced image on my tablet, she stopped chewing. A slow smile spread across her face. "I thought they would have drilled it by now," she said softly. "I have not been to the bank in 5 years. I stopped paying the fees when Veronica took over my checkbook. We have to go check," I said. Ruth nodded. "Get my walker." Getting Ruth to the Silvercrest Community Bank was an operation in itself. She was frail, and every step from the car to the glass doors seemed to cost her a measurable amount of energy, but her jaw was set. She was a woman on a mission. The bank was a quiet, carpeted fortress that smelled of money and stale popcorn. We sat at the desk of the branch manager, a Mr. Abernathy, who looked at Ruth's identification card and then at his computer screen with a furrowed brow. "Number 1437, he muttered. He typed for a moment, then stopped. He looked up, surprised. "Well, this is unusual." "What is it?" I asked, my hand instinctively resting on Ruth's shoulder. "The box is active," Mr. Abernathy said. "In fact, it is paid up through 2030. Someone came in 6 years ago and paid the rental fees in cash for 15 years in advance." Ruth looked at me. "Martin," she whispered. He knew I would need it." Mr. Abernathy led us into the vault. The air inside was cool and still, heavy with the silence of secrets. He used his master key, and Ruth, her hand trembling violently now, inserted her key, a spare she had kept hidden in the lining of her sewing kit for half a decade. The lock clicked. The long metal drawer slid out. We took it to a private viewing room. I set the box on the table and opened the lid. It was not empty. On top lay a thick envelope made of manila paper. Underneath that were stacks of bound documents, and tucked into the corner, looking incongruous among the yellowing paper, was a black USB drive. I opened the envelope first. It was a will, but it was not the one Mr. Henderson had read. It was dated 7 years ago. In this version, the Cedar Ridge Lodge, the lakefront cabins, and 51% of the voting shares of Ward Ridge properties were bequeathed to Elena Louise Ward. Veronica received a generous monthly stipend and the main house, but no control, no board seat, no power to sell. Attached to the will was a handwritten letter on my father's personal stationery. "Elena," it read, "I am a coward. I know that now. I have let peace in my house cost me the safety of my daughter. If you are reading this, I have failed to fix it while I was alive. Please forgive me. This is what I wanted for you. Fight for it." I felt tears prick my eyes, but I blinked them away. I did not have time for grief. I needed evidence. I picked up the other documents. They were financial reports from the early days of the company, annotated in Ruth's sharp, angular handwriting. They showed wire transfers from Nathan Ellison Estate to Martin Ward Construction. Loan, equity injection. They proved exactly what Ruth had said. The Ward empire was built on Ellison bedrock. Then I picked up the USB drive. A piece of white tape was stuck to the side. Written on it in black marker were 2 words: HP backup. "Harold Pike," I said. We left the bank with the contents of the box tucked into my messenger bag. I dropped Ruth off at the nursing home, promising to return later. I needed a secure environment. If Veronica had cyber surveillance on me, and after the email to my boss, I assumed she did, I could not plug this drive into my personal laptop. I called a friend from my college days, a cybersecurity specialist named Ben who lived in Boulder. I drove to his house, and we set up an air-gapped laptop, a machine with no internet connection, completely isolated from the world. I plugged the drive in. The folder structure was chaotic, the digital equivalent of a panic room. There were hundreds of files, scanned meeting minutes, drafts of trust amendments, and a folder simply labeled Protection. I opened it. There were memos written by Harold Pike. They were not legal briefs, they were diary entries. August 4th. One read, "She was here again, V.W., demanding the Ellison clauses be removed. Martin just sits there. He looks medicated. I told them it is illegal to alter the trust without beneficiary notification. V.W. said, 'Make it legal or we find someone who will.' September 12th. They are threatening to report me to the bar for the Peterson account errors if I do not certify the new signature. I am trapped." My stomach churned. This was extortion. Then I found the audio files. I clicked on a file dated 2 weeks before Harold Pike disappeared. The sound was grainy at first, the rustling of a phone in a pocket, then voices. "It is not ethical. Martin," that was Harold's voice, high-pitched, desperate. "You promised that girl." I know what I promised. My father's voice, he sounded weak, slurring slightly. "But Veronica says—" "I do not care what Veronica says," Harold snapped. "This is fraud." Then, a third voice cut in. Ice cold. Smooth. "It is only fraud if someone finds out. Harold. Veronica. And who is going to tell them? You? With your gambling debts? Martin is restructuring his assets to protect his family. That is all. You are going to sign the witness line, and then you are going to take that vacation we discussed, permanently." There was a silence on the recording, then the sound of a pen scratching on paper. I sat back, my hands shaking. It was a confession. It was conspiracy. It was proof that my father had been coerced and his lawyer blackmailed. There was one more file, a video file. It was grainy security footage from a camera mounted in the corner of an office. The timestamp was 3 a.m. The door opened. Veronica walked in. She was not wearing her usual pearls. She was wearing a hoodie and gloves. She went to the filing cabinet. She used a key, Harold's key, to open it. She pulled out a thin file folder. She flipped through it, nodded, and slid it into her bag. Then she walked over to the computer tower and plugged something in. She was deleting files. She was scrubbing the record. I sat there in Ben's basement, staring at the frozen image of my stepmother committing a felony. The validation washed over me like a cold shower. I was not crazy. I was not ungrateful. I was the victim of a massive, calculated theft. This was bigger than a probate court in Ridgeview could handle. This wasn't just about a bad will. This was federal wire fraud. This was racketeering. This was elder abuse. I needed a bigger gun. I spent the next 3 hours researching. I bypassed the local police. Veronica had half the sheriff's department on her donor list for the annual policeman's ball. I needed someone outside her reach. I found the Mountain States Integrity Bureau. They were a specialized task force based in Denver, focusing on complex financial crimes and inheritance fraud targeting the elderly. I wrote a tip. I kept it clinical. I did not use names at first. I described the asset seizure, the coerced lawyer, the hidden assets, and the digital evidence. I encrypted the file using the protocols Ben set up for me and hit send. 3 days passed. I stayed in a cheap motel 2 towns over, paranoid that Veronica would see my car if I stayed in Ridgeview. On Thursday afternoon, my burner phone rang. "Ms. Ward?" The voice was female, professional, and tough. "This is Elena," I said. "My name is Lila Torres. I am a senior investigator with the MSIB. I reviewed the data packet you sent." I held my breath. "Is it enough?" I asked. "Ms." Torres paused. "If the audio is authentic, and if you have the original documents from that safe deposit box, it is not just enough. It is a RICO case." I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 12 years. "I need to see you," Torres said. "I need to authenticate the evidence, and I need to speak to the grandmother. Ruth Ellison. Is she cogent?" "She is sharper than both of us," I said. "Good. Meet me tomorrow. 10 in the morning. There is a diner off Interstate 70. The Iron Skillet. Bring the drive. Bring the documents. And bring the watch." I froze. "The watch?" I asked. "Yes," Torres said. "You mentioned in your tip that the watch is the key to a wall safe containing the originals. We need that watch to get a warrant for the house." I did not have the watch. Veronica had the watch. I did not tell her that. Not yet. I hung up the phone. I reached into my bag and pulled out the photograph of the study. I held it in the palm of my hand. It was just a piece of paper, but it felt heavy. I traced the image of the silver watch with my thumb. For 12 years, that object had been a symbol of my punishment. It was the reason I was beaten. It was the reason I was exiled. But as I looked at the grainy image of the watch face, I realized it was no longer a symbol of my pain. It was a weapon. It was the one variable Veronica had forgotten to account for. She thought she was wearing a trophy, but she was actually walking around with the evidence of her own destruction strapped to her wrist. I closed my hand over the photograph, crumpling the edge slightly. "I am coming for you," I whispered to the empty motel room, "and I am taking back every single second you stole from us." Meeting Lila Torres at the Iron Skillet Diner felt like handing over a live grenade. I slid the heavy manila envelope across the sticky tabletop, watching her thumb through the documents. She did not drink her coffee. She just read, her eyes scanning the scan of the safe deposit box log, the letter from my father, and the printouts from the USB drive. When she looked up, her expression had shifted from professional curiosity to the cold, hard look of a hunter who just found a blood trail. "This is not just probate fraud. Elena," she said quietly, "if these recordings are real, this is racketeering. This is a conspiracy to commit wire fraud and obstruction of justice across state lines." She tapped the photo of the watch I had placed on the table. "But this," she said, "this is the linchpin. If we can prove that watch opens a hidden safe containing the original, unaltered will, then everything they have done for the last 7 years is fruit of a poisonous tree." I left that meeting feeling a surge of adrenaline. For the first time, I had an ally who carried a federal badge. But as I drove back into Ridgeview, I quickly realized that in this town, a federal badge meant nothing compared to the Ward family crest. The retaliation started 48 hours later. I had been staying at a motel, but I needed a local address to establish residency for the upcoming legal battle. I had applied for a lease on a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the north side of town. The landlord, a nice guy named Mr. Henderson, had practically promised me the keys on Tuesday. On Wednesday morning, he would not look me in the eye. "I am sorry, Ms. Ward," he said, staring at his boots. "We have decided to go with another applicant." "But we shook on it," I said, standing on his porch. "My credit score is nearly 800. I offered to pay 6 months in advance." He shifted his weight uncomfortably. "Look, I do not want any trouble. We got a call, a confidential reference check. They said you are unstable, that you have a history of property damage and frivolous lawsuits. Who called you? I demanded. He shut the door in my face. By Friday, the poison had spread to Denver. I received an urgent calendar invite from the Human Resources Director at Northline Metrics. I logged into the video call, my stomach tightening. Elena, the director said, her voice stiff. We received an email this morning from a concerned citizen. It alleges that you are currently the subject of a federal investigation regarding financial fraud and identity theft. My jaw dropped. That is a lie, I said. I am the one working with the authorities. I am the victim here. We have to take these allegations seriously. She interrupted. Until this is cleared up, we are placing you on administrative leave. We cannot have a senior analyst handling sensitive client data with this kind of cloud hanging over her. They were choking me out. They were cutting off my housing and my income in the same week. I opened my laptop and made the mistake of checking the local community forum. The Ridgeview Rant. There was a new thread trending at the top. The title was, Ungrateful Daughter Returns to Rob Grieving Widow. It was a massacre. Anonymous accounts were posting stories about how I had abandoned my dying father, how I was addicted to drugs, how I was jealous of my brother's success. She did not even cry at the funeral. One user wrote, she just stood there calculating how much she could sue for. I heard she harassed poor Mrs. Ward at the reading of the will. Another posted, imagine doing that to a woman who just buried her husband. I shut the laptop, my hands shaking. It was psychological warfare. They were isolating me, painting me as a monster so that when the truth finally came out, no one would believe it. At 2 a.m. on Saturday, my phone buzzed. It was Logan. I hesitated, then swiped to answer. I put it on speaker and set my recorder running. What do you want? Logan? I asked into the dark room. His voice was thick, slurred with expensive scotch. Just checking on my big sister, he drawled. Heard you are having trouble finding an apartment. Tough market out there. Cut the act, I said. You called the landlord. You emailed my boss. I am just a concerned brother. He laughed. It was a dark, ugly sound. You know, Elena, you really do not understand how this works. You think because you found some old papers in a box that you have leverage? You have nothing. You are a ghost in this town. I have the truth, I said. Truth is just a story with a better marketing budget, he replied. And right now, your budget is 0. You are digging in places you should not be digging, Elle. And I am telling you, as family, that it is going to get very bad for you. There are bodies buried in this town that you do not want to dig up. Is that a threat? I asked. The line went dead. The next morning, I drove to the Sunny Meadows nursing home. I needed to see Ruth. I needed to make sure she was safe. When I turned the corner into the hallway leading to room 312, I froze. Veronica was there. She was sitting by Ruth's bed, wearing a pastel yellow suit that looked ridiculously cheerful against the beige walls. She was holding a massive bouquet of lilies, flowers I knew Ruth was allergic to. Oh, Mother Ruth, Veronica was saying, her voice dripping with a sickening sweetness. You seem so confused lately. The nurses tell me you have been forgetting to eat and talking about old watches that do not exist. I stepped into the doorway, but neither of them saw me yet. I pressed myself against the doorframe, listening. I am not confused. Veronica, Ruth said. Her voice was steady, though I could see her hands gripping the arms of her chair. Veronica sighed. See? That is the dementia talking. You are agitated. I am so worried about you. I think you might have signed some papers recently that you did not understand. Maybe Elena gave you something to sign? You know she tries to take advantage of you. I signed nothing but my crossword puzzle, Ruth snapped. Veronica stood up, smoothing her skirt. She pulled her phone out and walked toward the door. I ducked into the alcove of the linen closet just as she stepped into the hallway. She dialed a number. It is me, she said into the phone. Her voice dropped the sweetness instantly. It was cold. Efficient steel. We need to schedule the competency hearing. Immediately. Yes, I want Dr. Evans. He owes us a favor. If we get her declared incompetent, anything she told the girl is inadmissible. We lock her down. We take her power of attorney. Do it by Monday." She hung up and walked down the hall, her heels clicking like gunshots on the linoleum. I waited until she was gone. Then I rushed into the room. "Grandma!" I gasped. Ruth looked up. She did not look scared. She looked furious. She pointed at the lilies. "Throw those in the trash," she commanded. "She knows they make me sneeze. The woman is a menace." I heard her. I said, grabbing the vase and dumping it in the wastebasket, "She is going to try to declare you incompetent. She wants to invalidate everything you told me." Ruth let out a dry, crackling laugh. She reached into her bedside drawer and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Let her try," she said. I took the paper. It was a medical report from a geriatric psychiatrist in Denver. It was dated 3 days ago. "Lila told me to do it," Ruth said, her eyes twinkling. "She sent a doctor out here on Tuesday, pretending to be my nephew. We spent 4 hours doing cognitive tests, memory, logic, reasoning." I scanned the bottom of the page. Patient demonstrates full cognitive capacity. No signs of dementia or Alzheimer's. Patient is fully competent to make legal and financial decisions. Ruth grinned. I scored a 29 out of 30. I missed one question because I did not care who the vice president was in 1982. I looked at her, feeling a surge of fierce pride. "You are amazing." "I am fighting for my life, Elena," she said seriously. "And for yours. Now go. If she comes back and sees you, she will speed up the timeline." I kissed her cheek and left. I walked out to the parking lot, my head buzzing with the victory of the medical report. I stopped dead in front of my rental car. The car was leaning awkwardly to the left. Both tires on the driver's side were slashed. The rubber was shredded, gaping open like wounds. I looked around the parking lot. It was empty. I looked up at the security camera mounted on the light pole directly above my car. It was pointing straight down at the ground. The wire dangling from the back of the housing had been cut. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. This was not a legal threat. This was violence. They were showing me that they could touch me whenever they wanted, and no camera would catch them. I called a tow truck, my hands shaking as I dialed. While I waited, my phone rang again. It was an unknown number. I answered it cautiously. "Hello? Ms. Ward?" The voice was old, male, and trembling. "Yes? My name is Miles Redding." The name hit me like a jolt of electricity. Miles Redding, the legal clerk, the man who had worked with Harold Pike. "I need to talk to you," he whispered. "I heard what is happening. I saw the forum posts. I saw the lies." "Where are you?" I asked. "Meet me at the playground behind the public library," he said. 30 minutes. Come alone. Please. I am terrified." I left my car for the tow truck driver and called an Uber. I had the driver drop me a block away from the library. I walked the rest of the way, checking over my shoulder every few steps. The playground was deserted. Sitting on a bench near the swing set was a man who looked like he was trying to shrink inside his own coat. He was wearing a faded woolen hat and clutching a reusable grocery bag. "Mr. Redding?" I asked softly. He jumped, clutching the bag to his chest. He looked at me, his eyes watery and red-rimmed. "You look just like your mother," he said. He scooted over, making room for me. I sat down, keeping a polite distance. "You worked for Harold Pike," I said. He nodded. "For 20 years. I filed his briefs. I made his coffee. I covered for him when the gambling got bad." He looked down at his hands. "I know about the will. Elena, I typed it. The real one. The one where you get the lodge." My heart skipped a beat. "You saw it?" "I typed it," he repeated, "and I saw Veronica Ward come in that day. I saw her threat. Harold. Harold was a weak man, but he was not evil. He was just desperate. She owned his debt. She told him she would ruin him." He opened the grocery bag and pulled out a thick leather-bound notebook. "Harold kept notes," he said. "He was scared. He told me, if anything happens to me, if I disappear, you keep these safe." He handed the notebook to me. I opened it. The pages were filled with frantic, scrawled handwriting, dates, times, quotes. October 4th. One entry read, VWW says the girl is a liability, says Martin is too soft. She asked me if there was a way to legally declare a sane person unstable. I told her no. She said, find a way. I looked up at Miles. Why are you giving me this now? He wiped his nose with a handkerchief. Because I am old. Elena, and because Harold told me something before he left. He called me the night he ran away to Mexico. He was crying. He said, if you ever see Elena Ward, you give her everything. Find the girl. She is the only one who did not lie to me. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. They are bad people. Ms. Ward, they destroyed Harold. They destroyed your father. Do not let them destroy you. I clutched the notebook to my chest. I will not. I promised. I took an Uber back to my motel. I felt armed now. I had the medical report. I had the clerk's testimony. I had the lawyer's diary. But the Wards were not done. When I got to the front desk of the motel, the clerk handed me a thick envelope. A courier dropped this off. He said, I opened it in my room. It was on heavy, bonded paper with the letterhead of Ames. Callaway and Associates, Clifford Ames, Veronica's attack dog. Cease and desist, the header read in bold letters. Ms. Ward, you are hereby notified that your continued harassment of Veronica Ward and your defamatory statements regarding the estate of Martin Ward constitute actionable torts. Be advised that we are preparing a civil suit seeking damages in excess of $5 million for slander, emotional distress, and interference with business relations. Govern yourself accordingly. I crumpled the letter and threw it in the trash. It was noise. It was fear disguised as legalese. Then, my phone buzzed one last time. It was a text message from a number I did not recognize. I opened it. It was a photograph. The image was high quality. Taken recently, it showed the Cedar Ridge Lodge at night. The massive timber structure was dark, silhouetted against the stars, except for one window, the window of the main living room. It was glowing with a warm, inviting yellow light. Below the image was a message. Tomorrow night, 8 o'clock. Come alone. Let us talk like family. I stared at the screen. It was a summons. It was a trap. They knew I had the evidence. They knew the walls were closing in. They were done sending lawyers and slashing tires. They wanted me in the room. I looked at the notebook Miles had given me. I looked at the scan of the watch on my laptop screen. I typed a reply to Lila Torres first. I am going in. Have the team ready. Then I looked back at the photo of the lodge. It was the place where my father had promised me my future. It was the place they had stolen. They want a meeting. Tonight, 8 o'clock. Her reply came back within 30 seconds. Do not go. It is a trap. They are trying to isolate you. I typed back. They are scared. If they are scared, they make mistakes. I need them to say it on tape. Lila. I need them to admit it. There was a long pause. The 3 dots on the screen appeared and disappeared. Finally, her message popped up. We will be there. Unmarked unit. We will park in the logging access road a quarter mile down from the driveway. Keep your phone in your front pocket, microphone out. If the signal cuts, or if you are in there longer than 60 minutes, we breach the door. I stared at the phone. 60 minutes. That was all the time I had to tear down an empire. I drove to the Cedar Ridge Lodge in a rental car that smelled of stale cigarette smoke. The road was narrow, a winding ribbon of gravel that cut through the dense pine forest. I knew every turn of this road. I knew where the potholes were. I knew where the deer liked to cross. When I was a child, this drive had been the highlight of my week. I remembered sitting in the back seat of my father's truck, watching the trees blur past, anticipating the smell of wood smoke and pancakes. The lodge had been his passion project. It was not just an asset. It was where he taught me how to skip stones on the lake. It was where he taught me how to hammer a nail straight into the deck planks without bending it. Hold the hammer at the end of the handle. Elena, he used to say, his large hand covering my small one. Let the weight do the work. Do not force it. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. I was done letting the weight do the work. It was time to force it. I pulled into the circular driveway. The lodge loomed above me, a massive A-frame structure of timber and glass. It looked warm. Golden light spilled out of the floor-to-ceiling windows, cutting through the darkness of the forest. It looked like a postcard for a perfect family getaway. I checked my phone. The recording app was running. The battery was full. I slipped it into the breast pocket of my blazer, making sure the camera lens and microphone were unobstructed. I stepped out of the car. The air was freezing, biting at my exposed skin. I walked up the wooden steps, the sound of my boots on the timber echoing the hammering lessons of 20 years ago. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open. The heat hit me first. A roaring fire was crackling in the massive stone hearth, consuming logs that were thick as my thigh. The smell was nostalgic: cedar, polish, and fire. But the scene before me was not a family gathering. It was a tribunal. The long dining table, a slab of polished walnut that cost more than my first car, was set for a meeting, not a meal. Veronica sat at the head of the table. She was not wearing her usual beige. She was wearing black, a high-necked sweater that made her look severe, like a judge. Her hands were clasped on the table in front of her. Logan was leaning against the stone fireplace, swirling a glass of amber liquid. He looked relaxed, but his eyes were tight. He watched me enter with the predatory gaze of a wolf watching a limping deer. And at the far end of the table, sitting in a chair that seemed to swallow him whole, was my father, Martin Ward. He looked terrible. The last time I had seen him properly, he was vibrant, terrifying, a force of nature. Now, he looked like a ghost haunting his own clothes. His skin was gray, hanging loosely on his frame. He was breathing with the aid of a small portable oxygen tank beside his chair, the clear tube running under his nose. But his eyes were still the same: hard, cold, unyielding. I stood in the entryway, keeping my distance. "Close the door, Elena," Veronica said. Her voice was soft, echoing in the high-ceilinged room. "You are letting the heat out." I pushed the door shut behind me. The lock clicked. The sound was final. I walked to the middle of the room but did not sit down. I stood on the Persian rug, feeling the eyes of my family dissecting me. "You wanted to talk," I said, "so talk." Veronica gestured to the empty chair opposite her. "Please, sit down. We are not enemies. Elena, we are family." "I prefer to stand," I said. Logan snorted from the fireplace. "Suit yourself." Veronica sighed, a sound of long-suffering patience. She looked at Martin, then back at me. "We are worried about you." "Elena," she began. The speech was rehearsed. I could hear the cadence of it, the rumors, the online harassment. "It is getting out of hand. It is hurting the family name. It is hurting the business. But more importantly, it is hurting you. We know you are stressed. We know you are grieving in your own way." "I am not grieving," I said. "I am investigating." Martin made a noise, a rasping cough that shook his thin frame. He glared at me. "You are dragging our name through the mud," he wheezed. His voice was weaker than I remembered, but the authority was still there, the reflex of a man used to being obeyed. "You do not understand the damage you are doing. You are listening to the ramblings of a senile old woman and seeing conspiracies where there is only business." I looked at him, really looked at him. "Is that what you told yourself when you signed the new will?" I asked. "That it was just business?" Martin flinched. Logan pushed himself off the fireplace mantel. He walked over to the table and slid a thick blue folder across the polished wood. It stopped inches from my hand. "Let us cut the crap," Logan said. He sounded bored. "We are prepared to offer you a settlement, a generous one." I looked down at the folder. I did not open it. "How generous?" I asked. $200,000, Logan said. "Cash, tax-free, and we will cover your legal fees." "And in exchange?" "In exchange," Veronica said smoothly, "you drop this nonsense. You sign a statement retracting your claims about the will. You agreed to a permanent non-disclosure agreement regarding the family business and estate matters, and you agreed to cease all contact with Ruth Ellison. I felt a surge of cold rage. You want me to sell my grandmother for 200 grand? We want to protect her, Veronica said, her voice dropping to a whisper, dragging her into court, putting her on the stand. It would kill her. Elena, she is fragile. If you really loved her, you would not put her through that. The kindest thing you can do is sign the papers and let everyone find peace. Peace, I repeated. You keep using that word. You do not want peace. You want silence. I took a step closer to the table. I could feel the phone burning against my chest. I am not signing anything, I said clearly. Not until you tell me where Harold Pike is. The room went deadly silent. The fire popped, a loud crack that made Martin jump. Veronica's eyes narrowed. Harold retired. He moved to a warmer climate. He disappeared the day before he was supposed to testify about the trust changes, I said, and he left a backup drive in a safe deposit box. Box number 1437, the one with the code engraved on the inside of the watch you stole from me. Veronica's hand went instinctively to her wrist. She was not wearing the watch tonight. She froze, realizing the mistake. I stepped closer to Martin. I saw the video. Dad, I saw her deleting the files. I heard the recording of you and Harold. Martin's face turned a shade of ash white. He looked at Veronica, panic flaring in his eyes. That is illegal, he stammered. You cannot record private conversations. That is inadmissible. It is perfectly admissible if it proves a felony. I said, tell me the truth. Did you sign that will freely? Or did she threaten to cut you off from your own son? Logan slammed his hand on the table. It was a violent, sudden noise. You shut your mouth, he shouted. You come in here, into our house, and accuse us? You are nobody. You are a failed investment. He walked toward me, invading my space. He smelled of liquor and expensive cologne. Harold was a drunk. Logan spat. He was a liability. He was messy. He should have done what he was told instead of trying to grow a conscience at the last minute. If he had just done his job, none of this would be happening. I held my breath. There it was. He should have done what he was told. I looked at Martin. He was gripping the arms of his chair, his knuckles white. And the will, Dad? I asked softly. The one in the wall safe behind the painting? The one Ruth told me about? Martin looked at me. For a second, I saw the father who had taught me to hammer nails. I saw the fear in him. He was trapped. He was dying in a house that was not his, surrounded by people who viewed him as a signature machine. It does not matter, he whispered. His voice was shaking. Why does it not matter? I pressed. Because it is gone, he blurted out. He yelled it, a desperate, broken sound. It is gone. Elena. There is no original. You cannot prove anything because the paper does not exist anymore. It was taken care of. Nobody can prove which version was real if there is only one version left. The silence that followed was deafening. Martin slumped back in his chair, gasping for air. He had just admitted to spoliation of evidence. He had admitted there was an original, and that they had destroyed it. Veronica stood up. Her movement was slow, deliberate. She walked around the table. She stood next to Martin, placing a hand on his shoulder. It looked like comfort, but I saw her fingers dig into his jacket. She was silencing him. She looked at me. The mask was completely gone now. There was no concern, no stepmotherly warmth, just pure, unadulterated malice. You think you are clever, she said. Her voice was low, a hiss of steam escaping a valve. You think because you have a few recordings and a senile old woman's story that you can touch us? I think I have enough, I said. You have nothing, she said. You are alone in the woods. Elena, accidents happen in the mountains all the time. People get lost. Cars go off roads. She smiled. It was the ugliest thing I had ever seen. I am giving you one chance. Walk out of here. Sign the papers tomorrow. Or I promise you, you will not just lose the inheritance, you will lose everything. Anyone who fights this family regrets it. I will bury you so deep under legal filings and debt that you will wish you had never been born a ward." I looked at her. I looked at Logan, who was smirking. I looked at my father, who was staring at his lap, defeated. I reached into my pocket. I did not pull out a weapon. I did not pull out a pen. I just tapped the screen of my phone once to stop the recording. "I think we are done here," I said. I turned my back on them. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Every instinct in my body screamed that Logan was going to hit me, or that Veronica was going to throw something. I walked to the door. My boots sounded loud on the wood. "Get out," Logan shouted after me, "and do not come back until you are ready to beg." I opened the heavy timber door and stepped out into the cold night air. I walked down the steps. I walked to my car. I did not run. I forced myself to move calmly, deliberately. I got into the driver's seat and locked the doors. I started the engine. As I pulled away, I saw Veronica standing in the window, watching me. Her silhouette was framed by the warm light of the fire, a dark stain on the golden memory of my childhood home. I drove down the winding driveway until I reached the main road. I pulled over into the logging turnoff where the shadows were deep. A dark SUV was parked there. The window rolled down. Lila Torres was sitting in the driver's seat, wearing a headset. She looked at me, her face illuminated by the dash lights. "Did you get it?" she asked. I pulled my phone out. I saved the file. I hit send. I looked at Lila. My hands were shaking now, the adrenaline crashing out of my system. "Logan admitted coercion," I said, "and Dad. Dad admitted they destroyed the original will." Lila nodded slowly. A grim smile touched her lips. "Then we have them," she said. I leaned back against the headrest and closed my eyes. "It is done," I whispered. The sun had barely risen over the mountains when the convoy of black SUVs turned onto the private drive of the Ward estate. It was a cold morning, the kind where the mist clings to the pine trees like wet wool. I stood just outside the wrought iron gates, my hands gripping the handles of my grandmother's wheelchair. Ruth was wrapped in 2 thick blankets, but she was sitting up straighter than I had seen her in years. "This is it," she whispered. Her voice was dry and hard, like dead leaves scraping together. I watched as the vehicle stopped. Doors opened in unison. Men and women in blue windbreakers with Mountain States Integrity Bureau printed in bold yellow letters on the back stepped out. They moved with a synchronized efficiency that was terrifying to watch. They were not here for a social call. They were here to dismantle a life. Lila Torres was leading them. She walked up the stone steps to the massive oak front door, the door my stepmother had painted a glossy black just last year to look more European, and hammered on it with her fist. "Federal agents, open the door!" The sound echoed through the morning air. Birds scattered from the trees. It took 2 minutes for the door to open. Veronica stood there. For the first time in my life, I saw her without her armor. She was wearing a silk sleeping robe. Her hair was unbrushed, and her face was devoid of makeup. She looked pale, puffy, and utterly furious. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked. Her voice cracked. "Do you have any idea what time it is? This is harassment. We will sue every single one of you." Lila did not even blink. She held up a folded document. "I have a federal search warrant for this property in the Cedar Ridge Lodge. Mrs. Ward, it authorizes us to seize all electronic devices, financial records, and the contents of any secured storage units on the premises. Step aside." "I am not stepping aside," Veronica screamed, grabbing the doorframe. "This is a charade. That girl put you up to this. We have nothing to hide." 2 agents moved forward. They did not touch her roughly, but they were firm. They guided her away from the door as if she were an unruly child. Veronica's eyes went wild. She scanned the driveway until she saw me standing by the gate with Ruth. "You," she yelled, pointing a shaking finger. "You did this, you ungrateful little witch. I took you in." I did not say a word. I just watched. Lila motioned for us to follow. I pushed Ruth's wheelchair up the driveway, past the manicured hedges, and into the foyer of the house I used to call home. Inside, It was chaos controlled by procedure. Agents were already photographing the living room, tagging laptops, and boxing up files from the hallway console. Martin Ward and Logan were standing in the kitchen, guarded by a uniformed officer. My father looked gray. He was wearing a robe over his pajamas, leaning heavily against the marble island. He looked like he had aged 10 years since the meeting at the cabin. Logan was pacing, running a hand through his messy hair, looking like a trapped animal. Lila looked at me. "Show us the study, Elena." I led them down the hallway. The air in the house was stale, smelling of lemon polish and the lingering scent of the expensive rose perfume Veronica wore. We stopped in front of the heavy double doors of my father's office. The room was exactly as I remembered it from the photograph. The dark wood paneling, the leather chairs, the smell of cedar and old tobacco. It felt frozen in time, a museum dedicated to Martin Ward's ego. I pointed to the wall behind the desk. "The painting," I said, "the hunting scene." 2 agents stepped forward. They wore blue latex gloves. Carefully, they lifted the heavy gold frame of the oil painting. Veronica, who had been dragged into the room by a female agent, let out a gasp. It was a sharp, strangled sound. She gripped the edge of the doorframe, her knuckles turning white. Behind the painting, just as Ruth had said, was a steel panel set flush into the wood, a wall safe. Martin let out a low moan and sank into one of the leather guest chairs. He put his head in his hands. "Open it," Lila ordered, looking at Martin. I cannot," Martin stammered. His voice was muffled by his hands. "I do not remember the code. It has been years." Lila turned to Veronica. "Mrs. Ward?" "I do not know what you are talking about," Veronica spat. Though her eyes were darting around the room in panic, I did not even know that was there. "My husband handles the security." Lila looked at the safe. It had a digital keypad, but also a mechanical dial. "Try the standard defaults," Lila told the tech specialist. The agent tried 1, 2, 3, 4. Nothing. He tried Martin's birthday. The red light blinked. He tried the date of their wedding. The red light blinked again. "One more attempt and it locks us out for 60 minutes, the agent warned. The room went silent. I looked at Ruth. She was watching the safe with a fierce intensity. "Try August 12th, 1942, I said softly. Everyone turned to look at me. Veronica's eyes narrowed. "What?" she snapped. "What date is that?" "It is not your birthday," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "And it is not Dad's." The agent looked at Lila. She nodded. He punched in the numbers, 081242. There was a pause. Then, a heavy mechanical clunk echoed in the quiet room. The light turned green. The door swung open. Ruth let out a long breath. "It was my birthday," she whispered. "He used my birthday, because he knew the money came from me." The agent reached inside. He began to pull items out, cataloging each one for the camera recording the search. "Item 1, the agent announced. 1 large manila envelope, sealed." He opened it. He pulled out a thick stack of papers. He read the cover page. "Last Will and Testament of Martin Ward, dated November 4th, 2012. "That is the original," Ruth said clearly. "That is the one he signed before she poisoned him against us." The agent continued. "Item 2, a handwritten letter on Ward Ridge property stationery." He unfolded it. I stepped closer. I could see my father's handwriting. Shaky, jagged strokes. "To my daughter." The agent read aloud. "I am trapped. I have made compromises to keep the peace that I should never have made. I am temporarily conceding to the demands to change the trust, but I am hiding this in hopes that one day you will find it and set it right. Please forgive a weak old man." Martin sobbed aloud. It was a pathetic, broken sound. Veronica stared at him with pure venom. "Shut up, Martin," she hissed. "Do not say a word." "Item 3, the agent announced. A series of signed contracts titled Spousal Asset Transfer Agreement. Lila took the document and scanned it. Her eyebrows shot up. "This is a payoff," she said. looking at Veronica. "This grants you $2 million in liquid assets from the company accounts in exchange for," and I quote, "support and facilitation of the estate restructuring. You were paid to force the change." "That is a lie!" Veronica screamed. She lunged forward, but the female agent caught her arm. "That is a forgery. That girl planted it. She broke in here and planted it." Lila ignored her. "Check the back of the safe." The agent reached in deep. He pulled out a small, black device, an old digital voice recorder. Item 4. Digital recorder. "Play it," Lila said. The agent pressed the button. The volume was turned up high. Harold Pike's voice filled the room, tinny and terrified, but unmistakable. "I cannot do it. Veronica." Harold's voice wavered. "It is fraud. It is a federal crime." Then, Veronica's voice, clear as a bell. "You will do it, Harold, or I will send the photos of you and that intern to the Bar Association, and then I will call your wife. Martin does what I tell him. You just need to stamp the papers." Then, silence on the tape. Then Martin's voice, barely a whisper. "Just sign it. Harold, please. I just want her to stop screaming." The recording ended. The silence in the room was absolute. It was heavier than the air before a thunderstorm. Veronica's face crumpled, the mask of the grieving. Elegant widow shattered completely. She looked ugly. Her face twisted into a snarl of pure hatred. "It is edited!" she shrieked. Her voice was raw, hurting my ears. "That is a deep fake. Technology can do anything now. She made that up. She is trying to frame me." Lila looked at her calmly. "We will have the audio forensics team analyze the metadata, Mrs. Ward. But given that this device has been locked in a safe for years, I doubt they will find any AI generation code." Suddenly, there was a commotion near the desk. I looked over. Logan had lunged for his laptop, which was sitting open on the side table. He was frantically typing, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Hey," the agent yelled. "Step away from the device." Logan ignored him. "I am just closing my email," he shouted, sweat pouring down his face. The agent tackled him. It was not graceful. They hit the floor with a thud that shook the floorboards. Logan scrambled, trying to reach the keyboard even as he was being pinned. "Get off me!" Logan yelled. "You have no right." "You are destroying evidence in the middle of a federal raid," the agent shouted, wrestling Logan's arms behind his back. "That is obstruction of justice." They hauled Logan to his feet. He was panting, his hair wild, his expensive shirt torn at the shoulder. On the laptop screen, a progress bar for a secure delete program was paused at 12%. He tried to wipe the drive, the agent said, snapping handcuffs onto Logan's wrists. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the world. Lila turned back to the safe. "Is there anything else?" The agent reached in one last time. His hand came out holding something small and metallic. "Item 5, he said. "One silver wristwatch, modified pocket watch style." He held it up. The light from the window caught the tarnished silver casing. It looked old. It looked tired. It looked exactly like the object that had started this entire war 12 years ago. I stared at it. It was the watch Veronica had slapped out of my hand, the watch she had worn on her wrist to taunt me. She must have hidden it in the safe after the meeting at the cabin. Realizing that I knew about the engraving, she thought she was hiding the key, but she had just led them straight to it. From the wheelchair beside me, a small, trembling voice spoke up. "That is mine." Everyone turned to look at Ruth. She was not looking at the agents. She was looking at the watch. Her eyes were filled with tears, but her chin was high. "That is mine," she repeated, louder this time. "It belonged to my father, Nathan Ellison. I gave it to Martin to hold for his daughter. It was never his, and it was certainly never hers." She pointed a shaking finger at Veronica. "You stole it," Ruth said, her voice gaining strength with every word. "You stole it because you knew it proved who really paid for this house. You thought if you took the watch, you took the history, but you cannot steal history. Veronica, it remembers." Veronica stared at the old woman she had tried to institutionalize. She opened her mouth to speak, to scream, to lie again, but nothing came out. She looked at the handcuffs on Logan. She looked at the open safe. She looked at Martin, who was weeping silently into his hands. She realized, finally, that there was no one left to manipulate. Lila Torres stepped forward. "Veronica Ward, you are being detained for questioning regarding conspiracy to commit wire fraud, elder abuse, and tampering with a witness." 2 agents stepped up to Veronica. She did not fight them this time. She went limp. As they clicked the handcuffs onto her wrists that had once worn my grandfather's watch, she looked at me. Her eyes were black holes. There was no remorse there, only a deep, burning hatred. "I will ruin you," she whispered as they led her past me. I looked her in the eye. I did not flinch. "You already tried," I said, "and you missed." They marched her out of the room. Logan was dragged out behind her, still shouting about his rights. The room felt suddenly empty. Despite the agents swarming around, I looked at Martin. He was sitting alone in the center of the wreckage of his life. The safe was open, exposing his secrets. His wife and son were in handcuffs. His mother was looking at him with pity and disappointment. He looked up at me. His eyes were red and watery. "Elena," he croaked. I looked at him. I wanted to feel angry. I wanted to yell at him for the 12 years he had let me suffer. But looking at him now, a small, scared man hooked up to an oxygen tank, surrounded by the consequences of his own cowardice, I just felt exhausted. I did not say anything. I just turned to the agent holding the watch. "Can she hold it?" I asked, gesturing to Ruth. The agent hesitated, then nodded. "Just for a moment. It is evidence." He placed the silver watch into Ruth's cupped hands. She brought it to her chest. She closed her eyes. She took a deep breath, as if she were inhaling the memory of a time before the Wards, before the money, before the betrayal. "Mine, actually," she whispered into the quiet room. I put my hand on her shoulder. We stood there together, the outcast daughter and the forgotten mother, reclaiming the only thing that had ever really mattered. The truth. We were back in the present, and the air in the courtroom was so heavy it felt like breathing underwater. On the evidence table, sitting on a small square of black velvet, lay Exhibit A, the silver watch. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of the federal courthouse, it looked small. It looked like a piece of junk you might find in a pawn shop bin for $20. It was scratched. The leather strap was worn dark by sweat and time. But everyone in the room, the jury, the gallery, and especially the defendants, could not take their eyes off it. The defense began their case with the precision of a demolition crew. Their strategy was simple: destroy the messenger. If they could make me look like a vindictive, unstable, greedy daughter, then the evidence I had gathered would look like a desperate fabrication. Clifford Ames, their attorney, paced in front of the jury box. He was a smooth operator, his voice a deep, reassuring baritone that made lies sound like reasonable misunderstandings. "We have heard a lot of dramatic accusations," he said, smiling kindly at the jurors. "But let us look at the source. Elena Ward has been estranged from this family for over a decade. She has a history of financial instability. She has a history of emotional outbursts. Is it not possible that this is simply a case of a daughter who feels entitled to money she did not earn?" He called his witnesses. First came Mrs. Gable, my old neighbor. She sat in the stand, clutching her handbag, and told the court that I was always a difficult child. She said I was prone to tantrums. She claimed she once saw me shouting at my stepmother in the driveway, conveniently leaving out the part where Veronica had just thrown my college acceptance letter in the trash. Then came a former member of the Ward Ridge Board of Directors. He testified that Martin Ward had frequently expressed concern about my ability to handle money. Martin loved his daughter, the man said, shaking his head sadly, but he knew she was not cut out for business. He told me often that he wanted to structure the estate to protect her from herself. Then, they played their dirtiest card. They called a therapist I had seen for 3 sessions when I was 22. Right after I left home, I had gone to him for anxiety. Clifford Ames managed to twist those 3 sessions into a diagnosis of chronic paranoia and persecution complex. By the time they were done, I felt like I was shrinking in my chair. The gallery was whispering. I could feel the doubt creeping into the room. Maybe I was the villain. Maybe I was just the crazy daughter trying to burn down the house. Then Logan took the stand. He wore a suit that cost more than my car. He sat with perfect posture, looking at the jury with wide, earnest eyes. He played the role of the protective son to perfection. "I never wanted to be the sole heir," Logan said, his voice trembling with rehearsed emotion. "I just wanted to protect Dad's legacy. Elena. She has always been obsessed with being the favorite. She could never accept that Dad trusted me with the business. I tried to include her. We offered her money. We tried to help her. But she just wanted to fight." He looked at me then, a look of such profound pity that I almost vomited. And then, Veronica. She walked to the witness stand like a queen ascending a throne. She was wearing black again, but softer this time. She dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue before she even spoke. "I loved Martin with all my heart," she whispered, "and I tried to love Elena. I really did. But she made it so difficult. She was so angry. When Martin decided to change the will, it broke his heart. But he felt he had no choice. He was afraid she would destroy everything he built." Ames pointed to the watch on the table. "And what about this watch, Mrs. Ward? The prosecution claims you stole it." Veronica laughed softly, a sad, tinkling sound. "Stole it? Heavens, no. It was just an old trinket of Martin's. It sat on his desk for years. Sometimes, when I missed him, especially when he was traveling for work, or later, when he got sick, I would wear it. It made me feel close to him. That is all. It was just a keepsake." She looked at the jury, tears shimmering in her eyes. "I have no idea why Elena is so fixated on it. Perhaps it is just another thing she thinks she was denied. It was a masterful performance. If I did not know the truth, I would have believed her." Judge Blake looked at the prosecution table. "Ms. Torres, your cross-examination?" Lila Torres stood up. She did not smile. She did not pace. She walked to the podium and placed a stack of files on the wood. "Mrs. Ward," Lila began, her voice cool and sharp, "you claim the changes to the will were your husband's idea." "Yes," Veronica said. "And you claim you never pressured him?" "Never." Lila picked up a piece of paper. "Then can you explain this document, recovered from the wall safe in your husband's study? It is an agreement transferring $2 million of company funds to your personal account, dated 3 days before the will was changed. The memo line reads, 'Facilitation of estate restructuring.'" Veronica froze. That is, Martin wanted to ensure I was secure. Lila dropped the paper and picked up another. "And this analysis from the forensic handwriting expert, it concludes that the signature on the final will, the one disinheriting Elena, shows signs of extreme tremor and pressure variation consistent with a hand being guided or forced." Veronica's eyes narrowed. "My husband was sick. His hands shook." Lila nodded. "Yes, he was sick, which makes him very vulnerable to coercion." Lila turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the prosecution would like to play Exhibit C, audio recovered from the residence of the deceased." Veronica gripped the railing of the witness box. "Objection!" Ames shouted. "That recording was obtained illegally." Judge Blake looked over her glasses. "We have already ruled on this. Mr. Ames, the recording was found in a safe pursuant to a federal warrant. Overruled. Play the tape." The courtroom went silent. Then, the speakers crackled to life. My father's voice filled the room, sounding weak and scared. "Just sign it. Harold, please, I just want her to stop screaming." Then Veronica's voice, sharp and vicious. "You will do it, Harold, or I will send the photos." The color drained from Veronica's face. The jury looked at her, their eyes wide. The grieving widow mask was cracking. Lila did not stop there. She played the recording from the cabin meeting, the one I had taken myself. The room heard Logan's voice, clear and arrogant. Harold was a drunk. He was messy. He should have done what he was told instead of trying to grow a conscience. And then, the most damning line of all, my father's voice, admitting the truth. It is gone, Elena. There is no original. It was taken care of. Judge Blake's head snapped up. She looked at the defense table. Her expression was thunderous. Spoliation of evidence, she muttered, almost to herself, but the microphone picked it up. Lila stopped the tape. Mrs. Ward, Lila said, did you destroy the original will? Veronica stayed silent. She glared at Lila, her chest heaving. I will ask again, Lila pressed. Did you destroy the will that named Elena Ward as the heir? I was protecting my family, Veronica shouted. It was a sudden explosion of rage that made the jury jump. That girl does not deserve a dime. She was never one of us. She is ungrateful trash. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Blake banged her gavel. Order! The witness will control herself. Lila sat down. She looked satisfied. She had cracked the shell. Now it was time to extract the pearl. The prosecution calls Miles Redding to the stand. Miles walked in. He looked terrified, clutching his hat, but he walked straight to the stand. He told the jury about Harold Pike. He told them about the late-night phone calls, the threats, and the fear that had driven a lawyer to flee the country. Harold told me, Miles said, his voice shaking. He said, if anything happens to me, find the girl. Find Elena. Only she deserves to know the truth. He looked at me across the room. He kept a backup because he knew they would try to erase her. Miles added, he knew they would try to make it look like Martin wanted this, but Martin was a prisoner in his own house. The jury was leaning forward now. The narrative had shifted. I was not the crazy daughter anymore. I was the survivor. Lila stood up one last time. The prosecution calls Ruth Ellison. The doors at the back of the room opened. The bailiff held the door. Ruth Ellison rolled in. She was in her wheelchair, but she sat upright, her silver hair perfectly coiffed. She wore a navy blue suit that looked like it was from another era. Elegant, timeless, and severe. The room went dead silent. This was the woman the defense had claimed was senile. This was the woman they said had dementia. Ruth wheeled herself to the witness stand. The bailiff helped her transfer to the chair. She settled herself, adjusted her jacket, and looked out at the courtroom with eyes that were clear as ice. Lila walked over to the evidence table. She picked up the velvet tray holding the watch. She carried it to the witness stand and placed it on the ledge in front of Ruth. Mrs. Ellison, Lila said softly, can you tell the court what this is? Ruth looked down at the watch. She did not touch it. She just looked at it with a mixture of sadness and triumph. She looked up. She looked straight at Veronica, who was sitting at the defense table, pale and trembling. She looked at Martin, who had his head in his hands, and then she looked at me. It is mine, Ruth said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. It was crisp, precise. Actually, she continued, it is mine. A ripple of confusion went through the gallery. Lila waited. Whose was it before? Mrs. Ellison? It belonged to my father, Nathan Ellison, Ruth said. It was his pocket watch. When he died, I gave it to my husband, Martin's father, and when he passed, I gave it to Martin, but I gave it to him with a condition. What was that condition? That he hold it for her, Ruth said, pointing at me, for Elena. It was supposed to be hers when she turned 21. It was an heirloom of the Ellison family. Ruth paused, her gaze hardening as she looked at Veronica. And for the last 12 years, it has been the only thing I kept to prove that my granddaughter deserves what my husband and I built, not what Veronica tried to steal. Objection, Ames shouted, standing up. Relevance? Who cares who owned a watch decades ago? Judge Blake stared at him, overruled. I want to hear this. Continue. Mrs. Ellison. Ruth turned to the judge. It is not just a watch, Your Honor. It is a key. A key? Judge Blake asked. Ruth nodded. My son, Martin. He was a weak man in many ways, but he was clever with mechanics. He built a safe behind the painting in his study. He knew Veronica was snooping. He knew she was reading his emails and checking his files. He needed a place to hide the truth. Ruth pointed at the watch. "The winding mechanism," she explained. "It is custom, a square bit with a triangular notch. It is the only tool that can engage the tumbler of that wall safe. Without this watch, that safe is just a piece of metal in the wall. You cannot even expose the keypad without it." She took a deep breath. "My husband, Nathan Ellison, provided the capital that started Ward Ridge Properties, the land, the initial loans, the equity. It all came from the Ellison side. Martin was the builder, yes, but the foundation was ours. And when Veronica started poisoning him against Elena, when she started forcing him to cut her out, Martin hid the proof in that safe." Ruth looked at Veronica with absolute contempt. "You wore it," Ruth said. "You wore it on your wrist like a trophy. You thought you were showing off your power, but you were walking around wearing the key to your own prison. And you were too arrogant to even know it." The courtroom erupted. It was not a whisper this time. It was a gasp that turned into a roar of conversation. Judge Blake banged her gavel 3 times, hard. Silence. Silence in the court. She looked down at the defense table. Her face was pale with anger. "Mr. Ames," Judge Blake said, her voice dangerously low. "Is it true that this watch opens the safe where the original will was found?" Ames looked at his clients. He looked at the watch. He looked like he wanted to vanish. I was not made aware of the mechanism of the safe, Your Honor," he stammered. Judge Blake turned to Lila. "Ms. Torres?" "We verified it during the raid, Your Honor," Lila said. "The winding key on the watch engages the faceplate release. It matches the mechanism perfectly, and the safe deposit box code engraved on the inside of the clasp, box 1437, led us to the financial records proving the Ellison funding source." Judge Blake sat back in her chair. She looked at Martin Ward. "Mr. Ward," the judge said, "did you hide the original will in that safe because you were afraid your wife would destroy it?" Martin stood up slowly. He looked at Veronica. He looked at Logan. Then he looked at me. "Yes, Your Honor," he whispered. "I did." That was the nail in the coffin. Judge Blake did not ask for closing arguments. She did not send the jury to deliberate. She looked at the papers on her bench, arranged them into a neat stack, and leaned into her microphone. "I have heard enough," she said. "The evidence presented here is overwhelming. We have clear proof of testamentary fraud, witness tampering, extortion, and spoliation of evidence." She looked at Veronica and Logan. "This court finds that the will presented by the defense is invalid, having been created under duress and through fraudulent means. The court recognizes the document recovered from the safe, the will dated November 4th, 2012, as the true and final last will and testament of Martin Ward, regardless of his current living status, as his capacity was compromised thereafter." She turned to me. "Control of Ward Ridge Properties, the Cedar Ridge Lodge, and all associated assets is hereby restored to Elena Ward, effective immediately." She was not done. "Furthermore, regarding the actions of Veronica Ward and Logan Ward, given the testimony regarding wire fraud, extortion of a legal professional, and the destruction of evidence, I am referring this entire file to the United States Attorney's Office for immediate criminal prosecution." She banged the gavel. The sound rang out like a gunshot. "Court is adjourned." Pandemonium broke out. Reporters were shouting. The jury was staring. But I did not look at any of them. I looked at Ruth. She was slumped back in her wheelchair, looking exhausted but smiling. I walked over to the witness stand. I picked up the watch from the velvet tray. It was heavy. It was cool to the touch. I knelt down beside my grandmother. "You did it," I whispered. Ruth reached out and touched my face. "No, Elena," she said softly. "We did it." Across the room, federal marshals were moving toward the defense table. Veronica was screaming at Clifford Ames. Logan was trying to push past a bailiff. Martin just sat there, staring at the empty space where his family used to be. I clasped the watch around my wrist. It was too big. loose and clunky. But as the metal touched my skin, I felt a circuit close. The time of the wards, the lies, the abuse, the erasure was over. Now, it was my time. Judge Blake's voice was not loud, but it filled the room, pressing into every corner like water filling a sinking ship. She did not read the verdict with drama. She read it with the dry, terrifying precision of the law correcting a mistake. Based on the forensic evidence, the testimony of the witnesses, and the admission of the defendants, this court issues the following rulings. She looked over her reading glasses at the defense table. First, the court invalidates the last will and testament dated 6 months ago. It is the finding of this court that the document was created under duress, undue influence, and fraudulent pretenses. The court recognizes the last will and testament dated November 4, 2012. The document recovered from the secure wall safe as the only valid expression of Martin Ward's intent while he possessed full capacity. I let out a breath. It was a small sound, but in the silent courtroom, it sounded like a scream. Second, Judge Blake continued, regarding the defendants, Veronica Ward and Logan Ward, this court finds sufficient evidence to support charges of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, testamentary fraud, and elder abuse. The matter is hereby referred to the United States Attorney for immediate prosecution. Bail is denied due to flight risk and the proven history of witness intimidation. Veronica made a sound like a wounded animal, a sharp intake of air that was cut off by her lawyer's hand gripping her arm. Third, regarding Martin Ward, while the court acknowledges his role in the concealment of assets, we also recognize the mitigating factors of coercive control, medical vulnerability, and spousal abuse. Mr. Ward is stripped of all executive powers within Ward Ridge Properties, effective immediately. His assets are frozen pending a full forensic audit to determine restitution for third-party victims. The judge turned her eyes to me. Finally, the court orders the immediate restructuring of Ward Ridge Properties. Elena Ward is appointed as the sole executor of the estate and the interim CEO of the company. The court orders that a trust be established immediately for the care and maintenance of Ruth Ellison, to be funded by the liquidation of assets previously held by Veronica Ward. She banged the gavel. Case closed. I sat there for a long moment. I expected to feel a surge of joy. I expected to feel the triumphant rush of victory, like the end of a sports movie where the underdog lifts the trophy, but I did not feel triumphant. I just felt light. It was the sensation of a heavy pack being lifted off my back after hiking for 12 years. I could breathe. For the first time in a decade, I was not fighting to prove I existed. I was just breathing. "Elena?" Lila whispered. "We need to go. The press is waiting." We walked out of the courtroom into a hallway that had turned into a chaotic sea of flashing lights and microphones. The story of the silver watch and the wall safe had gone viral. People loved a scandal, especially one involving a rich family eating itself alive. "Ms. Ward, over here. Elena, how does it feel to take it all back? Are you going to evict your father?" I stopped on the steps of the courthouse. I looked at the cameras. I thought about the angry girl who had driven away from Ridgeview with a bruise on her wrist. I thought about the woman who had sat in the dark listening to her father betray her on a recording. I leaned into the microphones. "This was not about the money," I said. My voice was steady. It was never about the money. This was about the truth. For 12 years, I was told that my memory was wrong. I was told that I was crazy for thinking I deserved to be treated like family. I looked directly into the lens of the nearest camera. Financial abuse is not just about stealing numbers from a bank account. It is about stealing someone's reality. It is about making them doubt their own worth, so you can take what belongs to them. Today, the court proved that you cannot erase someone just because they are inconvenient. I stepped back. I did not smile. I did not pump my fist. Behind me, the doors opened again. 2 marshals led Veronica Ward out. She was not hiding her face. She was glaring at the crowd. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unfiltered rage. She looked ugly, not physically, but spiritually. The beauty that she had cultivated with surgeries and expensive creams had dissolved, leaving only the bitterness underneath. Logan came next. He was handcuffed. As he passed me, he stopped for a fraction of a second. "You do not know what you just did," he hissed. His eyes were wild, manic. "You just lit a match in a gas station. Elena, you think this ends here? You do not know half the deals Dad made. You do not know what you just inherited." "Move it," the marshal said, shoving him forward. I watched them go. I felt a chill, but it passed quickly. Logan was just trying to scare me one last time. He did not realize that I was not afraid of the fire anymore. I was the one holding the hose. Then, the side door opened. Martin Ward emerged. He was pushing Ruth's wheelchair. It was a strange, sad sight. The once mighty titan of industry was reduced to a chauffeur for the mother he had failed to protect. He looked small. He looked like a man who had woken up from a long coma to find his house burned down. He stopped in front of me. He looked at his shoes, then up at my face. "Elena," he said. His voice was raspy. I looked at him. I did not hate him. I just felt a profound distance, like looking at a stranger across a canyon. I am glad you did it," he whispered. "I am glad you did what I should have done. Thank you." I looked at him. I wanted to forgive him. I wanted to hug him and tell him it was okay. But it was not okay. He had watched her hit me. He had watched her steal from me. He had let her erase me. I nodded once. "Take care of Grandma," I said. "The car is waiting to take you both to the lodge." I turned and walked away. I was not ready to be his daughter again. Maybe I never would be, and that was okay. The next 3 weeks were a blur of forensic accountants and federal audits. I moved into the Cedar Ridge Lodge, not as a guest, but as the owner. The place was beautiful, but it was filled with the ghosts of Veronica's taste. I spent the first week taking down the beige drapes and the abstract art. I opened the windows and let the smell of pine and lake water flush out the scent of her expensive perfume. I sat at the long dining table, the same table where they had tried to bribe me with $200,000, surrounded by boxes of files. Lila Torres was there, along with a team of forensic accountants from the Mountain States Integrity Bureau. We were performing surgery on the company. "Okay," Lila said, pointing to a spreadsheet. "This entire division, Ward Ridge Luxury Rentals, is toxic. It was built on loans leveraged against Ruth's original land trust without her consent. Liquidate it," I said. "Sell the properties. Use the proceeds to pay back the creditors and put the rest into the restitution fund." "And the condo project downtown?" the accountant asked. "The one Logan was spearheading?" I looked at the numbers. It was a house of cards. Substandard materials. Bribed inspectors. Shadow investors. "Shut it down," I said. "Refund the deposits. Tear it down if we have to. I do not want the Ward name on anything that is not solid." We went through it all. We found the shell companies Veronica used to siphon cash for her shopping trips. We found the payoffs to local politicians. We found the debts Martin had hidden. I sold the vacation home in Aspen. I sold the fleet of luxury SUVs. I sold the private plane timeshare. I stripped the company down to the studs, just like my father had taught me to strip a wall before rebuilding it. With the money we recovered, the clean money, the money that actually belonged to the Ellison legacy, I made a decision. I was not going to keep it all. I did not need a multi-million-dollar empire. I needed enough to take care of Ruth, enough to live simply, and enough to make sure this never happened to anyone else. I established the Ellison Ward Foundation for Financial Justice. It was a nonprofit dedicated to providing legal aid and forensic accounting services to elderly people and estranged children who were victims of inheritance fraud. We hired Lila Torres as the head of investigations. She quit her federal job the next day to join me. On a Tuesday evening, a month after the verdict, Ruth asked me to take her down to the lake. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of purple and gold. The air was crisp, smelling of coming winter. I pushed her wheelchair onto the wooden dock. The boards creaked under the wheels. A familiar, comforting sound. Ruth took a deep breath. She looked younger. The stress of the last decade had melted away, leaving her frail but peaceful. "Stop here," she said. I locked the brakes. I walked around to stand in front of her. She reached into her pocket. She pulled out the silver watch. She held it out to me. The metal caught the last rays of the sun, gleaming warmly. "It is time. Elena," she said. I hesitated. "Grandma, you should keep it. It is yours." She shook her head. "No, it was never mine to keep. It was a trust. I held it for my father. I gave it to Martin to hold for you. And now the circle is closed." She took my hand and placed the watch in my palm. Her fingers were cool and dry. "It is yours," she said firmly. "Truly yours. Not because of a will, not because of a judge, but because you fought for it. You earned the time it keeps." I looked down at the watch. I ran my thumb over the scratch on the casing. I traced the winding knob that had opened the safe. It was just a machine, just gears and springs, but it felt heavy with life. I put it on. I cinched the worn leather strap tight. It felt right. It felt like armor. "I will not let you down," I whispered. Ruth smiled. "You already haven't." In the weeks that followed, the vultures started circling. People who had been friends with Veronica, people who had shunned me at the funeral, started calling. They wanted to take me to lunch. They wanted to invite me to galas. They wanted to help me rebrand the foundation. "Oh, Elena, you are such an inspiration," one woman gushed over the phone. "We would love to have you speak at the country club luncheon. It is a story of survival." I declined them all. I did not want their lunches. I did not want their fake admiration. I chose to stay in the lodge, working with Lila, building cases for people who had no voice. Instead of a gala, I held my first seminar in the great room of the lodge. It was for law students and young paralegals from the state university. 20 of them sat on folding chairs, looking at me with wide eyes. I stood in front of the fireplace where Logan had once leaned and threatened me. I held up the silver watch. "This is not a story about getting rich," I told them. "This is a story about documentation. It is a story about reading the fine print. It is a story about having the courage to ask the question that makes everyone else in the room uncomfortable." I looked at their faces. They were the future Harold Pikes. They were the ones who would have to choose between signing the fraudulent paper or standing up for the truth. "When you see a family erasing a member," I said, "do not look away. When you see a will change 6 months before a death, ask why. When you see a wife speaking for a husband who can still speak for himself, listen closer." I spent 2 hours answering their questions. It was exhausting, but it was the most fulfilling thing I had ever done. I was turning the site of my trauma into a classroom for justice. That night, after everyone had left, I walked out onto the deck of the lodge. It was late. The stars were bright and hard above the mountains. The lake was a sheet of black glass. I stood by the railing, feeling the cold bite of the wind. I was alone, but for the first time in my life, I was not lonely. I looked at the watch on my wrist. The second hand swept around the dial. A steady, rhythmic heartbeat. Tick, tick, tick. I thought about Veronica, sitting in a federal holding cell, stripped of her pearls and her power. I thought about Logan, facing years of litigation. I thought about Martin, sleeping in the guest cottage, finally free of the woman who had controlled him, but living with the weight of his own weakness. And I thought about myself, Elena Ward. For so long, that name had felt like a curse. It meant I was the daughter who wasn't good enough, the daughter who was erased, the daughter who was slapped for touching a watch. But tonight, standing on the deck of the house I had reclaimed, with the foundation I had built, the name felt different. It felt like iron. It felt like something that had been forged in fire and hammered into shape. I had taken the name back. I had redefined it. Ward no longer meant a construction empire built on lies. It meant justice. It meant the woman who refused to stay silent. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was an email notification. It was sent to the general inbox of the Ellison Ward Foundation. Subject: Help needed. My stepfather is trying to evict me. I opened the message. It was short, desperate, written by a young man in a town 3 hours away. He said his mother had died, and suddenly there were new papers, new lawyers, and he was being told he had 3 days to leave the house his grandfather built. I read the words, and I felt a familiar spark in my chest. It was not anger anymore. It was purpose. I smiled. It was a small, sharp smile. I typed a reply. Do not sign anything. Gather every piece of paper you can find. I am coming. I hit send. I looked up at the stars one last time, then turned and walked back into the warmth of the lodge. The work was just beginning. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey, and I hope Elena's fight for the truth resonated with you. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Are you tuning in from a quiet room like Elena's lodge, or maybe on your commute? Let me know in the comments below. Let's share our thoughts and connect. Please do not forget to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so more people can hear these stories of justice and resilience. See you in the next one.